Here.
Councilmember Curtis,
Present.
Councilmember Danuski,
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Would you please rise and join Councilmember Curtis?
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
All right, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or modifications, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is an opportunity to express your views on issues that are important to you in the community. We ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. There will be a timer on the screen behind you. That, will the clerk please call the first person?
Vicki Grayland.
Hi, I'm Vicki Grayland, and I live in Kenmore. And I'm here to talk about the budget and the environment. As you consider next year's budget, I'd like you to please consider the environment and remember that a budget is a moral document. First, artificial turf and artificial lighting at St. Edward State Park are still environmentally and fiscally irresponsible. Instead, let's make a place in our city budget for solutions to climate change. I encourage the city to join the King County Cities Climate Collaboration. The group that I'm working with, People's Climate Action, is holding a climate summit next month for both citizens and elected officials. It will be about 2 hours on a Saturday morning, probably November 17th. As soon as we have a venue and more information, I'll email that to all of you. You're all welcome. We'll have a speaker to explain what other cities are currently doing to successfully meet their carbon reduction goals. Our neighbors to the south, Portland, have been very active and very successful in reducing carbon emissions as their city grows in population. And we at People's Climate Action have a suggestion for the K4C. We'd like them to spend their money hiring some experts to come up with a plan with specific actions that will have measurable results to reduce carbon. We have no leadership at the national level. It falls on all of us to find the answers and solve this problem, and I truly believe we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Graham.
Elizabeth Mooney.
Hi, Elizabeth Mooney, 5934 Northeast 201st Street. I'm here to encourage you and thank you as a city staff and a council for what you did, I think it was in 2015 or 16. You set up, I think it's called an interlocal agreement, correct me if I'm wrong later, for working with Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and using our code enforcement officer Craig Lum at the time. My understanding, I called City today to find out and hopefully meet Debbie Hohenstein. And I would like to ask to work together with the city at getting the word out to citizens, because as PERC president, People for Environmentally Responsible Kenmore, we want to continue what we started last July with the city and with Robin Evans Agnew at Tacoma with the STEM students that came up from Tacoma to do air monitoring. We want to get the word out to the citizens that when they smell those noxious fumes coming from the CMEX that are not monitored, we want to continue this effort and get citizens to know that they don't need to just call me or complain at Starbucks, where I met up with the Caldwells last weekend, or Patrick O'Brien this morning, who had to suck up the fumes and get a headache at 8 o'clock this morning. 7:30 is when the Caldwells smell it, because their office is right over there. We need people to know that those are not healthy And the only way we're going to do it is, as the mayor said a year ago to the kids who were in this room, we need more voices. People have just given up fighting CMEX, and they need to be on alert. So I want to let you know that we were successful. I don't know how many people know, but I just found out today from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency that the CMEX people were charged $27,000. They just paid it. It was thanks to 3 citizens and our city code enforcement agent corroborating the complaints of the Honors, the Ostrom's worker, and the people at Vintage over by Ichiban that had an antique store. They couldn't breathe. The asphalt fumes made them have to go in and use their inhaler. It's even written down that it causes cancer. And the point is that the city started something, and we need to continue it, because those 3 complaints happened thanks to our citizens helping those people get the word out to the city. The city's corroborating evidence allowed them to charge for 3 complaints, $9,000 each. They tried to get out of it. It happened in 2015, and they only paid it in July 2018. So we've been sucking those fumes, and we need to continue it. So hopefully in your budget, you will continue with that interlocal agreement, and I would love to meet Debbie Honstein and get the word out more brightly to the citizens, so they'll call me or call whoever so we can work together. And also, please do not change the St. Edward Park.
Ms. Mooney, we're at 3
Grassy.
minutes. We're at 3 minutes.
Please save our public money and leave it grass, and don't do an artificial turf at St. Edward Park. Thank you.
Matt Lacey.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I am here not as a resident, but as a rowing coach for the last 25 years, who's been involved with these students, though they don't know me yet, that are here representing the rowing team from Inglemoor. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Council and Mr. Carl Lindsay for their vision in chasing this project. I've been a part of the Boathouse Committee that's been working on trying to bring this boathouse to a reality. I know you're going to deliberate tonight. I'm just here as an advocate, not only for these students, but for the following generations of students to come. There are about 100 young men and women rowing right now, just about between 3 of the high schools in the North Shore School District. But over time, we're going to see hundreds and then thousands. And tonight, you're going to deliberate on a building that ultimately is going to serve generations of students and residents. And so I know we're going to be knocking around some numbers, but of course I definitely have an eye on the long ball. I think there's a chance here to enable the residents of Kenmore to capture their involvement with the lake, not by looking at it, but by defining their involvement by being on it. And I think that's just a precious opportunity. Waterfront access is so preciously scarce. And here's an opportunity to truly allow generations of not only students, but adult members of the community to engage the lake in a way that they really haven't been able to yet. So simply on behalf of the students that are here tonight, participating in a public process, good work. But for the generations yet that are going to be able to engage in the sport of rowing because of this boathouse, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey.
John Hendrickson.
Good evening, John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. I have a few comments related to the budget that was presented to you last week by the city manager. The first handout I gave you is a copy of the pavement maintenance and rehabilitation plan from 2010. Now, the city manager told you last week that you've been paying about $500,000 a year for your pavement overlay. And when, in fact, for years, our studies have told us that we needed to be up at around 1.8 million. So in 2010, it's highlighted there, they were suggesting 1.8 million in overlay. And if you go back to 2008, it was 950,000 a year. And the city was only choosing to spend about 500,000 a year. And in fact, with the issue with this, seemed to be resolved is the city hired a different consultant. And I think the council really needs to look at that And if you, maybe you paid someone to give you some bad advice, which is what you wanted because you didn't want to admit that liability that we have every year. And you know, if we don't keep our pavement maintained, the whole road breaks down, you have to redo the road bed. It's extremely expensive, okay? For 20 years, the city's been underfunding according to these reports. And I think you need to look at what happened with the new consultant if it wasn't deliberate, if there's not some kind of corruption there, okay? Second thing I have is the city manager talked about the sales tax, that we don't have a lot of sales tax, and we lost our sales tax equalization. Now, I gave you, the second handout I gave you is a copy of the feasibility study that showed a surplus for 2001, we incorporated of 1.7 million. And the second page there shows you those two numbers. It gives you a net income of 1.7 million. However, the last page, I show you where it says the sales tax equalization, when we incorporated, should never have been relied on in the first place. It said the city would be relying quite heavily on sales tax equalization from the state of Washington, which generally speaking is not a situation we advocate. Because of the possibility of amended legislation in Olympia that could affect sales tax equalization distributions, it appears to us predictable that the city's revenue from this source will diminish over time. So, two key adjustments from that study in 2001 where we told all the citizens how much surplus we were going to have. One, the police contract was well understated by 600,000. So take that from your actual report, adjust that out. Take out your sales tax equalization. Instead of a $1.7 million surplus, you have a deficit. Our original feasibility study, you know, what's the difference between negligence, gross negligence, and fraud? Knew or you should have known, you know, a willful disregard.
Mr. Hendrickson, we're at 3 minutes.
This was always known. This is nothing new that we don't have sales tax. Our per capita income is the bottom 20% of the county. We've always known it. We pay our road taxes, you don't admit to it. You say we don't pay road taxes. We paid over 90 million.
Mr. Hendrickson, we're at 3 minutes. Kathy Huffman. Okay, nobody else has signed up, Mayor.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else wishing to be heard? Thank you for your comments, Ms. Graham and Ms. Mooney. Mr. Hendrickson, thank you for your comments on the budget. Mr. Lacy, thank you. It's really good to see these students here. This council has been a big supporter of the rowing team, and certainly when it started at Inglemore, it was a shock. The first year out, I think there was almost 70 kids that signed up. We now have 3 high schools that are participating. So in just its second year, it's really expanded. And I know the council is pleased to be able to have this here in our city, to be able to support these kids, and be able to help provide them the potential scholarship opportunities that are going to come from their participation in rowing. So thank you guys for showing an interest in the sport, and I know that we have an interest here, and the whole rowing program, I think, started because of Councilmember Shrebnick and her involvement in the early going. So, and Matt, I realize that, but you deserve some credit here too. So thank you all very much, and we will be talking about the boathouse later tonight. All right. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second. Is there any comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed? Consent agenda stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is ordinance number 18-0466, temporary homeless shelter. Ms. Owsley.
I have a quick comment or question, if I could. Since we have all these kids here and the architect, do we want to move the boathouse discussion up on the agenda?
Well, we certainly can.
The thought.
No, and it's a good thought. Is there a general agreement to move this up? So, hold on.
Sorry.
Yes, so let's go ahead and do that. That's a good idea. I wished we would have caught a little early, but let's bring item number C up in front. Rhododendron Boathouse Project Update and action on funding and timing for boathouse option. Ms. Bent and Ms. Stanton, our Parks Project Manager, and Ms. Bent is our Community Development Director.
More direction on next steps. Oh, here we go. In the design of a boathouse for rowing shells at Rhododendron Park. The Walkways and Waterways bond issue provided funding for the park's.
Is your
water-
mic turned on?
I will project. How about that? Okay, all right. As you know, the Walkways and Waterways bond issue provided funding for the park's water walk and the parking upgrades that we built last year. With the new boarding float that you can see here, we now have the necessary infrastructure to support the proposed boathouse. A citizen advisory committee experienced in building rowing programs worked through the design process with the city and our consultants. And would members of the committee please raise your hand when I say your name and consultants? They include the George Pocock Foundation's Executive Director, Matt Lacey, whom you've heard from, Kenmore North Shore School District's Athletic Director, Lance Gatter, Kenmore Rowing Club's Director, Pam Marshall, KWAC's Liaison, Sherry Baker, Don Marshall and Ryan Monahan, and the consultant team of Neil Jorgensen of J3 Architects and Nina Glovacci and Terrell Osborne of Osborne Consulting. So thank you all. And as you know, we have high school rowing program participants here tonight, which I didn't do. So, slide 2. Where's the arrow? Okay. Here's a site plan of the project area, and north is to the right in this plan. The new parking and water walk are shown. The float is in blue, and the yellow rectangle is the footprint for the 40-foot by 70-foot boathouse. Geotechnical investigation shows that a traditional foundation here would crack and settle, and so the committee strongly recommends that only a pile-supported foundation is considered. Both the options before you tonight rely on the pile-supported design, and this is why the smaller option 4B was developed. In order to stay within the adopted budget, we needed to find ways to cut other things and in order to get that pile-supported foundation. So here is the concept identified as option 4B, the upper one, which fits within the current proposed budget of $505,000. And the structure is basically half the width of the originally proposed building. It will provide a single bay of storage racks for 14 boats, instead of the originally envisioned 2 bays. And 14 boats can serve up to 126 participants at a time. To serve the district's goal of 400 alternate day schedules and outdoor storage of 20 to 26 more boats would be needed. The second concept, option 2B, which we did this one earlier, found out how expensive it looked to be, so that's why we ended up with the later option of 4B. But the 2B costs out the 40-foot by 70-foot structure as envisioned during early design development in 2013, but which does exceed today's budget. It provides racks for 20 boats and an upstairs area for other uses. An additional $196,000 in funding is estimated to be needed in order to construct a basic larger building in 2019. This design is supported by the advisory committee as better meeting the needs of rowing programs. It can serve up to 180 participants at a time, and to serve 400, it would also require an alternate day schedule and outside storage of between 3 and 20 boats. So both options provide for a future second floor mezzanine to be added later, and this could be used for, or would be used for rowing machines, team meetings, and coach areas. Both options are basic buildings, and there are a number of add-ons which are shown separately. These could be bid as additive alternates or built later as funding allows. So the detailed project estimates are included in your agenda packet. The city manager's experience with capital projects supports what he calls a 50% experience factor. And to be included here is a rule of thumb or a kind of a reality check to account for the potential that the project would cost more than estimated currently. This factor has been applied to the add-ons here, as well as the base amount for a grand total for each option. So the Rob's experience factor would indicate a project budget needs of $885,000 and $1.5 million for the two options, well over the current anticipated budget of $505,000.
So is the 1.052, is that option, what option is that?
1.052, that's option 2B, that's the full 40-foot by 40-foot by 70-foot building, excuse me.
Okay, and then, but if you put on add-ons, then it brings it up another $500,000?
Yes, and the add-ons are listed on the next slide.
Oh, okay. All right, so the left, okay, I got it. Left side is 4B and right side is 2B, okay.
Right, so right now, our anticipated project budget for the half building, or the 20 by 70 foot is $480,000. Right now, it looks like we could get out the door, that's what we would spend on the project. To do the full building, we anticipate, just the base, without the add-ons, would be $700,000.
So do you have any costs of what the foundation would be to build a foundation for 2B, but only build 4B for now?
Yes, we did. It was, if I remember right, it was at least $50,000 more to build the full 40 by 70 foundation. Yeah.
So for the 50,000, we could build 4B, but be ready for 2B?
I'm looking at my engineer back there. Yes. 50,000 plus the incremental increases for sales tax, 1% for the arts permits, things like that. Yeah. Yes. So again, listed on the left are the add-ons that that would bump the project budget up. We could live without them in the near term, especially. So I wanted to give you that information.
Deputy Mayor's got a question here.
Oh, certainly.
There is just a restroom right around on the other side by the boat launch, though, right?
There is a restroom right around by the boat launch, and there's one at Rhododendron Park at the other end of the boardwalk.
Okay, thank
Yeah, the question becomes, if you're going to build an enclosed building, are you required to have something of a restroom inside or not?
Okay.
So, yeah, if we didn't need to build it, we wouldn't.
And Brian Hampson can weigh in on this, but, so if you're just building a boat storage building that just stores boats, then I don't think you need to build a restroom. But if you're creating meeting space and workout space and things like that, do you need a restroom?
Councilmember Shrubnik.
I just have a question, because the materials that we were given at the beginning say that the 20 by 70 can accommodate 6 shells, and then later it says 14 shells? So
Yes.
I understand those may be different sizes, I just want a little clarification.
I picked up on that just in time. I went back
Okay.
and looked. The original 6 was using very conservative spacing, like 42 inches
Okay.
vertical distance. So when they tightened those down to 30 inches, and some of the boathouses we visited were actually only 26 inches apart.
Okay.
30, yeah, the 14 and 20 numbers are reasonable.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm glad I caught that too. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is why we're here. We would like to know from the council. First question, can you select an option or give us direction on which option we should proceed with? And because we can't continue designing both, we don't have that kind of funding. And then the second question is, shall we proceed with design and permits now, including alternates in the design for a certain amount of flexibility or cost control? Or do we wait a year to secure the funding we need for either, for the larger building before we continue design? And there are two factors that I wanted to point out. One was that the shoreline permit is good until 2020. We can do construction in 2020. It actually expires in April of 2021, but that's not a good building season, so we should get it done by the end of 2020. And then the state capital budget is through 2019. So if we're under construction, that would indicate to me that we could get a reappropriation of any unexpended amounts or unreimbursed amounts. But if we weren't even begun, we might not be in as good a position to have that reappropriated.
Councilmember Curtis.
So just some general thoughts first. I'd rather move ahead sooner than wait. And every good idea is in competition with every other good idea. And as we're looking at our budget and getting that ready for November, there are a lot of competing interests this year and more challenges maybe than usual. I like the option of the 4B with the addition of building the foundation. So as long as you plan your next stage well, sometimes that's all you can afford. But there's a logical next stage, and it's just a matter of staging the project. It's not canceling the rest of the project. It's just staging. And a lot of big projects that you can't afford now, that's a good way to handle that.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
The 2B, the 40 by 70 option, would that allow room if you weren't using all of the space for storage of boats? Would that also accommodate potentially erg practice in the wintertime, things like that? I know that the school is running into problems being able to accommodate that, so I just wonder if that could work that way.
Okay. We understand that ERGs as electrical devices need to be protected from the weather. I would say if the 20, you say the 20 by 70, is that right?
Well, I was looking at 2B, which I think is the 40 by 70.
Oh, yes, okay, the 40
Yeah.
by 70. If it had the metal siding, then
Yeah.
yes, there would be room. It would be a question of pulling them out into the aisles and pushing
Yeah.
them back when they're done. But yes,
Yeah.
it could accommodate that as long as we added power.
And the
as an
20 by
add-on.
70 would not. Is that a fair statement?
Well,
Or,
yes, it would not.
Yeah,
And it also
right.
has the problem of not being weatherproof, so it wouldn't
Yeah.
be suitable.
right.
I thought the 40 by 70 was two-story.
It's room for a mezzanine, so I think it's 18 by 20-foot upstairs area for the erg machines and coaching space and meeting space, which we haven't designed that in these options. We haven't
But-
shown the cost.
I don't think you need electricity for ERGs, do you?
They don't plug in.
They don't plug in anywhere. You don't need electricity for them.
Oh, okay,
They're
They're
strictly
mechanical.
physical exercise.
okay, the ones we saw at, maybe I assumed something I shouldn't have, but the ones we saw at the Lakeside Rowing Center had electricity because they had plug-ins for chips to read their output.
Oh, yeah, well,
and
I think
track.
the ones we're using.
All right,
Yeah,
Not that
there is
advanced.
well, yeah, but I think that's just a little battery.
okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I knew I saw they had outlets and everything in that floor, so, okay.
Councilmember Danuski.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, if we went with option 2B and waiting to see if we can get additional funding, we're not asking for any more money from the city. We're giving them time to get additional funding on their own. I don't, under potential funding, I don't see city. So is that a correct statement? That basically we're just
Yes.
giving them a little bit more time to find some more money? Okay. And if we did go with 2B, could you revert if they don't get money fairly easily?
Could we do what now? I'm sorry.
Revert back to a 4B type option if you don't get
No,
the funding?
that's the difficult part.
Okay.
That's why we need to pick an option now. We can't really, it's a different design by the time we get it designed.
Do you have any comments on chances of getting these potential funds? Is this just pie in the sky hoping? Are there good chances? Do we-
Well, we did very well with the youth sports grants for the St. Ed's. And so it may mean that the city would apply for the youth sports grants for this project.
And that's the county funding, correct?
Yes, King County, yeah, the youth sports grant, that's a King County program. So that would be something the city would be the applicant, but the George Pocock Foundation would fill out the application for.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Just a quick comment on the funding piece. My understanding is that, it's a pretty good shot for this particular funding announcement, but I think the other piece is, we're short, for the option 4B, it's about 200,000, something like that, give or take. That's not an insurmountable, or that's certainly not an insurmountable amount of money to raise potentially in other ways as well. So I think
I know we had.
other options.
We had discussed with the school district. Is that option still on the table, or has that disappeared?
Yeah, we have it under current. It's not 100%, but we're fairly confident we're going to see 250,000 from the school district.
That would certainly help in building 4B.
Mm-hmm.
That's already included under the 505,000.
That is, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm certainly in favor of building the foundation for 4B. So the funding is available, you can sort of add it. And it looks like the design of the open-sided building could be enclosed if funding were to appear.
True.
So, Councilmember Curtis.
So what happens if we don't get any money from the school district? So then we only have half of even the 4B.
We don't have enough money to build either one.
Danuski.
I guess I just have one other comment is, I've seen a lot of projects, and if you get something that kind of works, you go on to the next project and the next project, and sometimes these phase things never end up getting completed. So I guess I'm a little more interested in the 2B, since it's not asking for funds from the city, and it's just giving basically some extra time to fundraise.
All right, so we're looking for some decision here. Councilmember Smith.
And I still do not have clarity on if we choose option 2B and funding is not secured, then what happens?
We don't go out to bid.
So, okay, just the project is completely dead then?
I think there's a couple of options with the larger option. You either say, put the project on hold until the fundraising has been completed and you've got the full amount of funds to complete it, or another option would be to say, if there's direction to go with the larger option, use the funds which are currently allocated for the design, to get you through the design process, but only construct if you get those additional funds. So there are sort of two subsets to the larger option, I think.
Okay, and to take it a step further, so if something like some of these add-ons in the design process, and I'll just use restrooms because they're an obvious one because of the plumbing infrastructure, but if you design something, assuming you don't have it, and now you want to come back, there would be no construction started, it would strictly be a design component, and then you would just redesign it?
Right, I think that's probably another thing to think of too, is both these buildings do not include any of the add-ons, and so again, it would be helpful if there was direction, should we proceed with the design for some of the add-ons, so as we're in the design process, it's easier to do that during the design, rather than wait till later and then say, can you redesign it to add it in?
Right, so for me, just to kind of let you know, had we already not committed millions in taxpayers' dollars to other water infrastructure improvements that we're doing down there and at Twin Springs, I'd be a little more apt to consider the larger one, but I am reluctant to, knowing that I feel like there's so many unknowns, and I do see this as a kind of one of these project creeps where I feel like once we go down a level of commitment, I'm concerned that all of a sudden we're going to be at a point where nobody's got the money and we need 450,000, and who's going to, we're the obvious people that, the city's the one where everybody will look to. So I am concerned about that, and basically for that reason, I'd be more apt to build the larger pad that would accommodate the 2B, but pursue the 4B option.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Are we entertaining motions? I'm not quite sure of our process.
Yes. We are trying to give them direction. Direction on option
Okay.
2B, 4B. Proceed with design permits now with alternates for flexibility, or wait a year, secure funding before we continue to design. Those are our choices. Councilmember Curtis.
I did have one question before I'd like to make a motion, but so what are we doing in the meantime? So how is the program working with no place to store the boats?
Right now, the rowing programs, both of them are operating out of Log Boom Park. They have a fenced area, and they just launch off the beach. So that's what's happening now.
All right, so I would like to make a motion that we do 4B with the addition of the extra pad to be ready for 2B when more money appears.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. So is that enough direction for you? Okay, so we'll start with which option we want. So the motion then is the pad for 4B and proceed with design on 2B.
We're in discussion, right?
Yes.
My understanding is 4B is the
Is the
narrower.
structure, and 2B is the pad.
No.
No,
So 4B with an add-on.
Right.
The add-on being build a pad
right?
for a 4B eventual, 2B eventual. But that's not a 2B. We're just building the pad while we're out there drilling piles.
Okay, so we're only talking the pad, we're not talking a building now.
Correct. Just
Okay.
add to be prepared for that next stage.
Fine, so-
Basically, I'm thinking about phasing this project.
Fine.
And
So no structure, we're talking about pad.
no, 4B has a structure.
Okay.
4B has an open-sided,
With the
half-width structure.
2B pad.
With the 2B pad.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. So the motion in front of us is to build, or to have the 2B pad and design the structure as the 4B structure until additional funds come in. That's the motion, and we are certainly just talk to it. Councilmember Smith.
So I realize in this motion, we have to come up with an additional 50,000 or so. Isn't that what I heard the approximate cost of that is? And so that is something that I'm not thrilled about at all, and I would expect if we do it that we don't have to look at building the structure or changing a structure ourselves, that can be done with other options, but I'd be willing to do it to at least do some sort of, lay a foundation for a future better facility.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
And just to underscore, so if we went with this option that's proposed and funding became available to build the larger, we would not have the design, we'd have to take the other one down? It seems short-sighted to me.
No.
It's a little unclear. Okay.
What we would have, and under this motion, is we would proceed with the design to go out to bid for the full 40x7 pad, but only the 20x70
Yeah.
Right.
building. So in order to add the other 20x70 part, we'd have to start over, get a new design for that work.
Right.
Yeah. And
But you
take
wouldn't
that to
tear
bid.
down the old structure,
Correct.
you would add to it.
Correct. We designed 4B, so that's half a 2B.
Right.
Right.
Raise it, you don't waste anything.
All right. So the motion in front of us is to build the pad for 2B and the structure 4B to design. Clerk, please take the roll if there's no further discussion.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik? Mayor Baker?
Yes?
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
5 yeses, so passed.
5-2. All right, now. So you, I guess you have the option.
We have the option, yes.
You have the option of 4B with the pad built for 2B.
And we can proceed and design it to the existing budget.
So now the question then remains, do we want to wait a year to secure funding, or do we want to go ahead with the design now?
That's correct, that's the question. And we will have to fundraise for that additional 50,000.
Right.
It's out. Okay.
Councilmember Curtis.
So my understanding is the 4B option happens sooner, the 2B option happens later when funds are
Correct.
secured. So we don't have to wait
No, we
with the
don't.
proposal we just adopted. We can start designing.
We can, yes,
Yes.
we can. We can proceed.
While we're
directly.
trying to raise that extra 50,000, or while the group is trying to raise that extra 50,000.
And get the money from the school district.
Right.
And
But
I
that's already been figured in.
Yes, yes. And I would like to say that we, actually, our cost estimate for the smaller one, 4B, is actually about 30,000 below the adopted budget. So the shortfall really is closer to 20,000. So that should
Okay.
be doable through a George Pocock or youth sports grant application. Both of those should come in time for us to build it. We wouldn't have the award information for the youth sports grant until April or May, which is
Right.
after the time we'd want to go out to bid. So there's a little exposure there.
Okay, so I guess the question is, do we want to wait or we want to proceed now, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm still confused then.
okay.
I thought with what I proposed, it was do it now. The 2B was the one that was going to be delayed. So the 4B is not to be delayed. It's build this thing as fast as you can, realizing it's
Okay.
only really part of the full project that we want.
Okay, yes. The reason that could have applied for both is if you wanted to do the add-ons for either one of those, we would have had to get more money. But you're right. We can proceed.
So
with
then
the
it's
design.
assumed that we want to build this thing now. Any disagreement with that?
That's my assumption. Get this,
Fine.
they need it sooner than later.
It won't ever get cheaper.
No, it certainly won't. And these kids deserve some place to keep the boats rather than having to march them into the water from the shore.
And more,
Councilmember Shrubnik.
more to the point, I mean, we're going to be in construction at Long Boom in the next couple of years as well. So, I mean, the location that they're currently in is not tenable. So,
It's always been temporary, so.
right, exactly. So, but it is my understanding that the part of the rationale for choosing the 20 by 70, and, albeit with a larger footprint, is to get it done more quickly.
Okay, so it looks like we're all in agreement. Do it now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, guys. Now go and do what your superintendent, Michelle Reed, said. Got a championship in 4 years now. Thank you, guys. All right. come back then to A. Ordinance number 18-0466, temporary homeless shelter. Ms. Owsley, Mr. Hampson, and Jack is not with us.
I am getting him on the phone, Mayor.
Uh-oh.
You have reached the voice.
Well, you gotta get the money now, dear.
Well, they're applying, I assume they're still gonna apply for the grant, yeah. Less red. You wrote that down from? Yeah, I checked it. Rob, do you want me to? I'm good for now.
He's hiding.
That's weird. Uh-huh. Oh, that's familiar.
Trying to reach an earthworm.
Hi, this is Jack.
Hey, Jack, welcome to the city council meeting.
Thank you.
We do have a life-size cardboard cutout here at the presenter's table. But we are just getting started, and I am joined at the presenter's table by Brian Hampson, Chief Horvath, and Rob Carlinzi will be joining in the discussion of the proposed ordinance number 180466 for temporary homeless shelters. So I will just begin the discussion tonight that I'm sure you remember September 24th, the council discussed a proposed ordinance, asked that and voted on several changes to that proposal, which have been made in the ordinance before you. They are, number one, outlining a process for how the council would review and approve cold weather, low barrier shelters, and temporary homeless shelters if more than one program applied to operate in Kenmore in the following year. The second change was to allow cold weather, low barrier shelters to operate for 31 consecutive days instead of 30, which was in the original draft. And third, for cold weather shelters, require sex offender and felony warrant checks for prospective people who would be using the service. With that, I would like to also mention that on September 24th, representatives from Lake City Partners were here that evening. Spoke with them today, and they are not able to join us tonight. In the couple of weeks since the last meeting, we have had a chance to confer a bit with King County staff further about some of their requirements for funding, particularly the low barrier cold weather shelters. So with that, unless Rob or anyone else at the table wants to make any remarks, we'll take questions.
Well, so we are bringing back the ordinance exactly as you directed. One twist has come around since we last talked, and that is, we found out when they call for warrant checks, the county can't distinguish between felony and misdemeanor. Nevertheless, we're still bringing the ordinance to you as you directed.
Councilmember Curtis.
I think there's an excuse me, an inconsistency in calling it a cold weather, low barrier shelter if you've added a barrier. So I'm okay with calling it a cold weather shelter and require the warrant checks and sex offender checks, but you can't have both. So you have to take everywhere that phrase is in there, that needs to be subtracted out to be internally consistent.
Fair enough.
Well, what if you're not checking for misdemeanors? So county system aside, if you're not checking for misdemeanors, could you still call it a low barrier shelter? Medium barrier?
Councilmember Shrevenick.
I had a good conversation with Mark Ellerbrook today, who's the head of All Home. And he, just to be clear, low barrier is an approach. There's no hard and fast rules about that. The funders, including King County and Seattle, and other funders encourage certain approaches to minimize the barriers, such as not doing certain kinds of background checks, not having stringent rules about alcohol, drug, those kind of things. Each program makes their own call, and at some point, if there are too many barriers, the funders say, that really isn't the approach. Mary's Place, for example, used to have an approach that wasn't considered low barrier. The county's worked with them for a number of years to reduce the barriers. And so this isn't a hard and fast rule. I think if the intent is to have low barrier, we can use that vernacular. I'm comfortable with taking it out or keeping it in. I don't think that's the point. I just want to make another point that there are other places that have, in Bellevue in particular, he called out, as having dealt with this exact issue 3 years ago, and I know the city is considering that. I don't, it's, the timing's kind of unfortunate that we didn't have that information. And yet here we are today trying to make a decision. My personal preference would be to delay this until we get more information from our surrounding cities, all of which have cold weather, relatively low barrier shelters, not just Shoreline, not just Seattle. This is not information that we had before us. And I think, literally all of our surrounding cities have similar kinds of shelters. And they're all dealing with this. So I think, it would be great to have more information. And some of them, including Bellevue, which again, Mark talked about in more detail, dealt with this in terms of regulating through the zoning about where low barrier shelters could be. That's an approach I'd like to at least consider. So I'm not sure what to do with this except to say that I have reservations about pushing this forward. The only good part about pushing this forward is we are at least not left with the lack of any policy. So I would be okay with moving this forward in whatever condition it is, with a thought toward, let's revisit this when we have more comprehensive information about the low barrier shelter in a few months maybe, so that we can kind of get back on track before the applications come in for next fall. Clearly this isn't, what we're doing now is not going to impact anybody until the applications come due. So, we do have a little bit of time to revisit. Sorry, that was a long speech. And I did want to make one other point, that Lake City Partners is not the only game in town in terms of shelter providers that do this kind of work. There's lots of others. that church or another entity could take it upon themselves to work with a different provider. So, yeah.
Can I, clarifying question, so you learned that our next door neighbor cities all have cold weather shelters?
Mark's quote was most cities.
Okay,
They
so-
literally have hundreds of shelters across the county.
Okay, but, so I know Lake Forest Park doesn't. I checked that with the city
Okay.
administrator just the other day. And
Okay.
Bothel's ordinance is so stringent that they require background checks, so I don't think Bothell does. And I talked to the Shoreline city manager, and they do have a low barrier shelter, as we all know. And I asked her if there's regulations surrounding it, and she said no. And I said, well, do you at least make them come in for a temporary use permit? She said, nope, no permit, no regulations, they just come, and it hasn't really been an issue in their community.
Councilmember Smith.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it. I would encourage us to at least adopt the policy, and if we want to come back and approve or make amendments to it at the future time, fine. But we've had this come now before us. That's probably the fifth time, and I think it's time to get on with it and keep moving forward. I also would say that I think cities will continue around us to evolve in their policies, and we may too, but I think we created a policy that is very fair and reasonable and meets a reasonable expectation for the community, and so I would encourage us to pass it.
Councilmember Curtis.
I do have a question it might be addressed in here, but I couldn't find it. So it just says that the sex offender and the warrant check will be done, but is it every night they show up, or do like once a month good enough? It doesn't state. I mean, I would imply that it's every single night. If they come for 30 nights, we have to do that check 30 times, because it doesn't say it's good for the rest of the month.
As it's currently written, it says before admitting a potential resident. So my understanding is if the same individual comes back, he's already been admitted into the system and wouldn't have to go through that process again, as long as that camp is in that facility. So if John Smith comes in on a Monday and John Smith comes in on Wednesday, but is out on Tuesday, John Smith has already been vetted by the organization and would not have to go through the process again.
Okay. Does that need any clarification anywhere, or is that clear to everybody else except me?
That's kind of the way I envisioned it, but.
Because it'd be obviously a waste of time to do it every single night.
Right.
That's what makes sense, but I guess if there was an easy phrase that could be added that says what admitted means, so once they come in once in that month, they're good for the month.
And I believe we would have the discretion administratively to make that call and to define that.
I would also just point out too that people can enter the system, the county system of people who are served by shelter providers. So that would be kind of a way of keeping track of who is using the shelter system by whomever providers are being funded by a public agency.
It doesn't sound like, though, if they were admitted another month to some other place in the system, we'd count that. It has to be the month that they show up in Canmore, that they're, we
Right.
call it admitted means that.
Right.
Okay.
Your Honor, so Bellevue had looked into, so this is regarding the warrant check issue. So Bellevue, with their low barrier shelter, had looked into another option other than formally checking their warrants, and they were gonna do some other way that wasn't quite so difficult. So Chief Horvath called his counterparts down at City of Bellevue today. And can you tell us what they were trying to do and what they finally ended up doing?
So they have been working on a process to try to vet low barrier admittees or intakes. without going through the 911 center. And according to the assistant chief, they were not able to come up with a system that was constitutional, and so they have dropped that whole process at this point. The only thing that they require right now for the low barriers is the sex offender check. The sex offender check can be done through an online, publicly available website. So any organization can go online, either through the King County Sheriff's Office, which has a link to that website, or it's a national website, and enter a name, and it will populate whether that individual is a registered sex offender. The same can be done for a paid by usage or by contract method for warrants and criminal history checks. It just depends on whether that organization wishes to set up an account with one of these general search engines that will do background checks and warrant checks and so forth.
Deputy Mayor, then Councilmember Smith.
So Chief, kind of on that same topic there. So earlier, City Manager Carl Lindsay said that the county didn't have a way to really only search for felonies when they're doing a background check. What would the sheriff's office response be to doing a check and seeing that somebody has a misdemeanor warrant out for them?
So the communications center's standard operating procedure is they will accept the call from these shelters. They'll enter the name into the crime information system, the Washington Crime Information System, as well as the national database. And that checks for 3 things. Actually, it checks for 4. Driving status, criminal warrant status in the state of Washington, national criminal warrant status, and sex offender status nationwide. So all of those queries go out at the same time. All of them return at the same time. The dispatcher will see, or the call receiver will see what comes back, but the standard operating procedure for, again, confidentiality reasons to a non-involved party is to only divulge that there is a warrant in the system or the person is a registered sex offender, not what kind of warrant is in the system. At that point, the call receiver will send a call over to the dispatcher who's in the appropriate area, and deputies, officers will be dispatched to respond to the location where said warrant person is.
Okay, so let's say we do get a shelter here who locates and they follow our ordinance here that is only asking for, where we're only excluding felony warrants. Somebody comes in knowing that that's how we're set up, the check is run, they maybe have a misdemeanor warrant out for them. We're going to be sending over police officers to pick them up from the shelter, is that correct?
That is correct, because that's what Washington State requires of all law enforcement agencies to do.
No, I appreciate it.
It's a court order or an order by a judge to bring that person into custody and before the court.
No, I just wanted the clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Smith.
Actually, he covered my exact question.
Councilmember Marshall.
But Chief, isn't that, I see in my line of work all the time, there's a check in criminal proceedings to check with another jurisdiction that has, for instance, a misdemeanor warrant out and say, do they want to extradite? But no such option here, or do they normally not?
No, that is correct. So upon officers arriving at the scene, they are required to verify whether that outside agency, for instance, Bothell, does want to extradite said party. And we have to wait for an answer from them before we actually take them into custody.
One other question.
Go ahead.
So this system was by 911 calling in. Was there any sense whether our applicants or anybody would be able to have access to the usual JIS system or the JAB system, the actual court system that we see, or is maybe that's not available to non-court entities? I don't know.
There is a system available called the WATCH program. It's offered by Washington State Patrol. It's only a criminal history. It does not divulge whether there are active warrants in the system.
So, just to use Lake Forest, Lake City Partners, suppose they call from their offices down there. They know who is going to be staying in the shelter next week. They've got a list of people, they do the checks on them, and one does come back. You're not going to go down to the Lake City Partners.
That is correct. We will not go into City of Lake
So-
City.
Therefore, they can run the checks before they even come here and say, you know, we advise that you don't go to this shelter or whatever.
That is possible.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Curtis.
But it sounds like if somebody just shows up in Kenmore, if we require the warrant checks, then it will follow the procedure that the chief outlined. So yes, there's a workaround by them going to Lake City first, but people don't know about that. They're just cold, and they want a place to sleep.
Well, I mean, that's
They
the
have to get
purpose
here.
of this. Pardon? Councilmember Danuski?
I guess, I don't think that people are coming in here cold. They have to get here with their bus ticket and
Right.
get processed.
Right.
So I think that they're not just walking in off the street,
Councilmember Smith?
at least in this model.
Chief, is a warrant a public record?
Yes, it is.
So what is the invasion of privacy or the privacy concern that you reference? I'm just trying to piece that together.
I'm not sure what Bellevue developed and why they came out that way with their legal advisors, but that was the answer I was provided.
Okay, thanks.
I notice that there's very little mentions of weapon checks. It says they're not allowed, but I don't see that there's any actual weapons check. Was that by design?
Can Jack answer that? Jack, are you there?
Yes,
Did you hear the mayor's question?
I didn't hear his question.
I noticed that there is nothing specific about a weapons check. It just says weapons and drugs and alcohol are prohibited. But I didn't read anything about an actual check. Is there, there's no requirement for that, right?
That's correct.
I
That's
believe-
correct. And so that would likely come down to what the shelter's policy on that is. Like the Lake City Partners shelter has taken the stance of if they see a weapon, then they'll take it, and there will be a punishment tied to that, like the resident can't stay the next night or something like that. But yeah, they're not actively searching and checking people at that specific shelter. So again, with what we have, there's just the code of conduct, and then whatever the shelter's policy would do would be what would currently dictate that.
Yeah, Councilmember Smith?
So I actually interpret it a little differently. I think it's irrelevant what the shelter's policy is. We say in here you can't have weapons. So their policy, I remember, says it can't be visible. Well, that's not what ours says. You can't bring a weapon. So there should be no weapons in the homeless shelters.
All right, any further questions? The chair will then entertain a motion to adopt ordinance number 18-0466.
So moved.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councilmember Curtis?
Was that with the term low barrier removed, or the word low barrier still in there?
That is with low barrier still in there. If you want to make an amendment, you can.
May I comment?
Yes, please.
I
City
think,
Manager.
I think for the purposes of our ordinance, we can define low barrier. And since we're not requiring misdemeanor check, that could be low barrier for Kenmore. And therefore, keep the term low barrier in the ordinance.
I guess the question is, if low barrier means, if somebody's defined it to mean a certain thing, and then every entity in the whole Puget Sound defines it different, that's fairly confusing. I mean, maybe we could call it minimal barrier, or do something to distinguish it from a word that somebody's already coined and given a definition to. And argues with people and twists their arm to gradually make them believe in low barrier. So minimal barrier?
Or reduced barrier?
Reduced barrier, low, but something other than a term somebody's already defined. So we can define anything we want if we come up with the word ourselves. So maybe I'll make an amendment to the motion that we change the term low barrier to minimal barrier?
Is there a second? I'll second for sake of discussion.
And my argument would be low barrier is already determined, and it does not include sex offender checks and background checks.
Councilmember Smith?
I would say it's a more recent enough term that we have enough flexibility in being able to define it as we wish. And in some ways, I would hope more cities would define it closer to the way we are defining it. So for that reason, I would vote against it.
Anybody else? All right, so we have a motion on the table, and that motion is to amend the main motion to include the word minimal barrier and remove low barrier.
Excuse me, clarification, minimal or minimum?
Minimal.
Minimal. Which is where low barrier, put a minimal barrier.
All right. So there's a motion before us to change the word low barrier to minimal barrier. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith? Mayor Baker?
No.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
No.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Fails 3-4,
4-3.
or 4-3, excuse me.
All right. Back to the main motion on the table. To approve ordinance number 18-0466 as written, dealing with temporary homeless shelters. Deputy Mayor.
I've stated my objections at previous council meetings with us adding requirements and kind of taking away the low barrier option. I just want to be clear that a vote for this ordinance is a de facto ban on Lake City Partners and North Lake Lutheran from hosting the winter shelter that they hosted last year successfully with no incidents, and that they're going to be hosting again in November. This will also scare off anybody with any sort of warrant, regardless if it's a misdemeanor or a felony, because of how the background check system is set up, from seeking shelter in Kenmore. I do appreciate the certainty that this gives for future tent cities who want to locate in Kenmore. We're setting up a good framework for that, and I appreciate that. But I can't support this ordinance because it literally leaves some of our most vulnerable people out in the cold.
Any other questions, discussions? Councilmember Shrubnik.
As I said before, I'm going to vote to push this forward only to give us some framework to work with, but I also have a problem with it, and I would like to be able to get to yes within the next 6 months. So I will definitely be doing my own homework and hopefully working with others to do more homework on this.
And I feel very strongly that one of our primary missions as an elected official is to provide for the safety of our community. And I just can't have a group of people being bussed in without some sort of check. So, any further comments, suggestions? Clerk, please take the roll.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
No.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
No.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Passed 5-2.
5-2. All right. Next item on the agenda.
Thank you, and thank you, Jack.
Resolution 18-312, adopting additions to the city's personnel policies to establish standby pay and adopting additions to the administrative policy and directives to provide safety footwear allowance. You're welcome. Mr. Azizi.
Mayor, can I make one clarification before Ben starts? It would be 18-313. It was a numbering error. So
Okay.
313, please.
18-313, not
Yes.
312 as written.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the council, Mr. City Manager and Councilor. I know you have a long agenda item. It's a big item. It's coming out the city budget, so I'm going to try to be as efficient, as quickly as possible on this item. As a kind of background that we have been working on the interim public workshop and maintenance and operation division. City of Kenmore contracts most of maintenance and operation activities to private and public contractors. We will continue to contract a big chunk of our activities, but one of our biggest contractors since our incorporation has been the City of Lake Forest Park. This contract has worked well for us for the last 20 years. But due to changing needs of each city and the increased demand on the services, both cities have mutually agreed to perhaps start doing their own maintenance and operation divisions. To that end, in May, we received a letter from City of Lake Forest Park that they notified us that they will cease their services effective December 31st of this year. You have asked us to put together a City of Kenmore Maintenance and Operation Division plan, implementation schedule, and associated cost. We have reviewed that with you in 2 council meetings, one in study session in August, and then the September 10th, the council actually authorized the city manager to proceed with the implementation of the plan. Since then, we have been working very hard with your staff to develop job descriptions for the new maintenance workers, working on the interim shop site, SSR 522 Shell property, which we will come to you with a permit application sometime soon, and a few other items, particularly the post office remodel project, the back of the post office for office space. City manager asked me to also take a look at our existing policies, if there are any gaps in our policies for the new division that we need the council's direction. We did that. So 2 areas that we have identified that we need to make additions to our personnel policies and administrative policies. And those 2 areas are standby pay and safety clothing allowance. What are they? Standby pay is that you would ask a public works and / parks maintenance worker to be on call after work hours during the weekends and holidays to respond to emergencies. And we compensate those employees for daily basis. And they have to be available to respond to any emergencies within 30 minutes of a phone call. That's one of the reasons that we compensate them, because we restrict them, their movements of off-work hours. This is not a new pay for us. We have been paying for this as part of our contract at Lake Forest Park. Lake Forest Park had a standby employee, and we compensated them as part of our annual contractual payments. Second item is the safety boots. Washington Administrative Code requires us to provide safety boots for employees that are working outside and exposed to hazards. And this is a policy that they uniformly pretty much adopted for all cities. And this is one area that we also need to make some adjustments to our existing policies. Developing this kind of policies, in terms of the cost of them on an annual basis, they're very small in relative to overall operation of the division. For example, the cost of our standby call and the cost of our safety boots on annual basis will be about less than about $20,000. It's about $19,200. That's what we anticipate. But yet, these are very important and visible policies for the employees. So we want to make sure that that we provide something compatible with what's being provided around us. But we also need to be financially conscientious that we don't want to lead the market in that regard. So we check and review the policies of the 4 cities surrounding us. That's Bothell, Kirkland, Kenmore, and Shoreline. Of those 4, 3 have union labor contracts. There's quite a bit of pages, each one of those contracts. We looked at them and we find out what they are paying, and based on that information and the statement that I just made earlier, we're recommending something for you to consider. In terms of the safety wear, City of Kirkland provides $200 every year. Lake Forest Park provides $500 as needed, not more than once a year. Bothell provides $250 per year. Shoreline has no policy that we can find. Shoreline, by the way, doesn't have a union contract. They do have administrative and personnel policies. We did review the administrative policies. I couldn't find anything in the Shoreline in that regard. I'm sure there's somewhere else in one of those resolutions and ordinances. I just couldn't find it readily available on that. Standby pay is all over the map. The Kirkland provides 15% of hourly rate, and 25% hourly rates, depends on if it's a holidays or the regular weekdays. Lake Forest Park provides $40 per day and $30 during the emergencies. Bothell provides $45 per day. Shoreline provides about $1.50 per hour, so that corresponds to roughly about $27 per day. Reviewing that information, looking at what our neighboring cities, sister cities are providing, we're proposing that we provide $250 maximum per year safety wear allowance based on a reimbursement basis. If an employee wants to buy a more expensive boot, believe it or not, I didn't know that, you can actually spend upwards of $500+ on the safety boots. But we think that $250 is a sufficient amount of funds to buy a good safety boot for our employees. And then we are also proposing for you to consider that the $45 per day on standby employees as a compensation. Should you, we're here to get your input and answer any questions, and should you agree with that recommendation, we do have a accompanying resolution for you to consider. That's the resolution number 18-312.
3. Resolution 18-3.
Yeah, the number was actually incorrect, but I apologize. It's 313.
Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
So, couple questions. On the standby pay, I was curious why it was $40 per day and then less, $30 per day during emergencies. When you're more likely to get called out on an emergency, like storm and ice conditions, why pay them less? I was just curious.
This was a outlier when I look at everybody else's policies. You do have a general City of Kenmore policy, just as many other cities. That is, during the emergencies, all employees are on standby status. Bothell does that, Kirkland does that, as well as Shoreline does it. What Lake Forest decided to do is that in addition to one employee being in standby, they wanted to put all maintenance workers on perhaps more secure standby status by giving them $30 per day during emergencies like snow and ice removal event.
Okay. Then my second comment is on the safety boots. So I wear work boots in my new profession, and I like Red Wing work boots, and they aren't even steel-toed. I'm not sure you can get a decent work boot for $250. It cost me more than that, even without the steel toes. So I'm thinking more like the $300 range might be closer to actually covering a decent boot.
Fair enough.
Councilmember Danuski.
Did you do any research on what boots cost when you looked into this?
I actually looked at on the Amazon and a few other places, and it's been a while since I dealt directly with that issue. But you can actually spend upwards almost $400 to $500. You could buy for your seasonal employees, which I think we're going to do probably what Bothell does, a reasonable safety boot that would last for about 3 months in seasonal work, $150. But I think the council member Curtis is right that we were actually internally debating on this issue. Should we do $250 or $300? And 300 would give a little extra to get the boots that desire for the employees. So,
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I actually was going to ask the same question that Councilmember Curtis was asking. I was actually flipping through Zappos right now, looking at boots and steel toes, and there's a decent selection here of things that are under $200. I'm not opposed to going up to $300 because we'll have to adjust it up at some point. Anyway, my question is actually, so is this just cash given to the worker, or is this something where they purchase it and then submit for reimbursal?
it will be based on reimbursement basis. So if somebody wants to spend more than 250, or if you agree 300, more than 300, they pay out of their pocket. They bring the receipt, but they get reimbursed from the city for up to that amount is approved by the council.
Okay, thanks.
And gives some discretion also to operations manager, that particularly for seasonal employees and summer helps.
Mr. Hampson, you have something
I had
to
a
add?
yes, I had a comment. Even though we don't have a policy here in Kenmore, we do provide work boots for our inspectors and field workers in our department, and have been since I've started working here. And that price range has kind of changed over the time that I've been here. It started, I think, about $150, seemed about reasonable. It went up to $180, but like we're seeing and hearing, people are buying $250 to $300 boots and have to pay the rest out of their pocket. And when they're looking for these, they have steel toe, steel shanked, or appropriate. They have other materials now that can use as alternative to a steel toe or shank, but then comfortability too. Once you get into those, it's up there in the $300 range.
Councilmember Curtis.
I would just comment, in my research, you can have two boots that look the same on Amazon, but when you ask the Red Wing guy, how's this one made and how's this one made? This one's made overseas with all the cheapest material you can get, and this one's made with all the quality stuff that's actually comfortable. Yeah. So it makes a big difference on wearability.
I actually recommend 300 because it's a small gesture that could go a long way with the morale.
So we can just ask you to do 300. We don't need a modification, an amendment to the ordinance. Do you want to do an amendment just to make it?
Just the resolution, I believe it says 250. We just need to amend the resolution to
Fine.
state that 300, Mr. Mayor.
All right. So let's just start with that one then. So the chair would accept a motion to change the resolution to go from 250 to 300.
I'll make that motion to change resolution 18-313 to increase the price of the safety boots to $300.
I'll second.
that. Deputy Mayor, one second. Okay, Deputy Mayor seconded. All right. Any further discussion? I think we can do this one with, all those in favor to increase from 250 to 300, say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, next then the chair will entertain a motion to approve resolution number 18-313.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is that, I'm not hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Passed.
All right. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda, the one we've just been waiting for all night long. Presentation of the 2019-2020 proposed biennial budgets for general fund revenues, city council, city manager, city clerk, finance and administration, legal, non-department, public safety and development services, city manager, Mr. Carlinzy, assistant city manager, Ms. Housley, finance administration, Ms. Gregory, and city clerk, and police chief Horvath, and development services director Brian Hampson. Boy, we got them all. All right, so just for clarification and to remind people of how we've done it and sort of inform the new people on how we do this, we're going to cover each section. And we're going to approve that section or work that section through until we do approve it and we're done with it. We won't go back to that without some extenuating circumstances. So with that in mind, here we go.
And Your Honor, we put that long list on there just in case we could cover all those tonight.
Yeah, right.
And,
Wishful thinking.
but if it does get late and we haven't covered them all, we can send the ones that aren't covered to a future council meeting. But we put them on there for the public's benefit, just so that we could cover them if they went quickly.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Yes, we do have a large team here tonight, and we'll sort of do this in segments, because first I want to give you a preview of the general fund revenues, and then we'll move into the departments. And as we come up on some of the department discussions, other folks will come to the table to present and answer questions about their department budgets. Does that work?
Works.
Okay. And I would like to just make a caveat as we go through the sections. If there are questions that we can't answer, for instance, as we get to a certain one, I'd like to be able to bring those back at the next meeting, even though I know you do like to review a section and get through it and move on. But sometimes there are questions that we could bring up or answer at the following meeting. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. And also because we have two new council members, and this is the first budget book that I've provided to them, and then it's a new budget year for everyone. Are there any questions about the document itself or how it's laid out, or should we just dive into the details?
Comment. I actually, trying to find what I'm looking for now, but I liked the way that the table of the different programs with the dollar amounts that were allocated to each of them, the way that was laid out. That appears to be different. Is it different in some way that it just seemed easier to read or to go through this time in a lot of ways than I remember in the past?
The tables that are with each department?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that is new. That is
Okay.
new. It seems like every 2 years it's new and different.
Okay.
But, and we just got that information before we printed the budget, so I thought that might be useful for starting off or bringing up a PBB discussion, which we'd like to incorporate more as we go through
through these presentations.
Yeah, so it was actually just a compliment, because I
Good.
just thought I just felt it easier to work through.
Good.
And so,
Because I think what we did 2 years ago, we just had a long list of all the city programs, they weren't differentiated by department necessarily. And this helps us talk about those PBB programs in the context of a department, which has a lot more relevance. So. Okay, well, as you know, tonight we're going to try to review the general fund revenues and several of the departments in the general fund. And that would include everything from the city council's budget, city manager, finance and administration, city clerk, legal, public safety and development services. And I think that's actually very doable tonight. It's a lot earlier starting point than last week. So I will start with the general fund revenue. And I'm really only going to hit the high points, the major revenue sources, but if you want to talk about something that I don't present, that would be fine too. So I wanted to compare for you where we started with the 2017-18 adopted budget. We only amended that so far this biennium by $72,000, and those amendments were during the 2 budget amendments that we made in 2017, some for code enforcement recoveries, reimbursements on the St. Edward Lodge environmental impact statement, and then reimbursement from DNR for that abandoned boat removal. So that brought us to $23,605,000. Our projections for the biennium are revenues of $24,513,000, and this is higher than the budget for a few reasons, including building permits being higher in 2018, or at least our projections include that. Property tax receipts greater than we had budgeted. Our water and sewer franchise fee revenues are also greater than we budgeted by about $200,000. And in our general fund, you will see that we have some projections for reimbursements on the Lake Point project. And these are not just standalone revenues. They are actually an offset to expenses that we have in the departments too. But I believe our agreement with Lake Point is that many of our costs are reimbursable up to a certain point. So we've included the revenue and expense in the budget. So for 19 and 20, our revenue budget's $25,877,000, and this does include a property tax increase of 3% of the levy in both years, 2019 and 2020. That brings in $730,000 of revenue, additional revenue. We have been aggressive in our overhead reimbursement calculations of administrative staff costs and passing costs to the capital projects where we can for the engineering and park project managers. And again, the Lake Point potential reimbursements. And all those increases are somewhat offset by development revenues being a little less than we budgeted in 2017 and 2018.
Excuse me, do you want questions? Do you want to go through this?
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to take questions as we go.
Okay, so I have a question on the 3%. So I assume that's the 3% this year, and then that's a compounded number, so it's including then it would be 6% in 2 years total.
Well, it does compound. So the first year you raise it from the levy to 3% more, and then the next year the levy goes up another 3%. So yes.
So do you know offhand, because it is compounding, it isn't a simple formula, do you know approximately how much additional revenue is resulting from each 1% increase?
Approximately, yes. So I calculated the first year, the increase or the amount of additional levy revenue that you would gain by taking 3% over 1%, and that's $97,000. So it's 40, about 48.
About 48, okay.
Per 1%. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And then in the second year, that additional overtaking 1% goes to 198,000. That's where you see that compounding
Right.
increase come in, so,
Okay, thank you.
yes.
Go ahead, Councilmember Curtis and Deputy Mayor.
So I had sort of a, I guess maybe it's a philosophical question on this 3%. So for years, early on, when I was on council, we were not taking the increase and we were banking our capacity. And then we, for a couple of years, just took the 1%. And now here we are calling on our bank capacity. So something has clearly changed from my early years on council to how it is now. And I guess the question I'm asking the council is, has our appetite gotten bigger than our budget? So we do, we like to do stuff. We like to be, accomplish things. And have we gotten to a point where eventually we'll use up all our bank capacity and still be short? And I know there's discussion in the book about being in the type of city we are and all those things, but part of it, we were in the same kind of city back or 10 years ago, and we were not using our taxing capacity that we could. So it feels like something else has changed besides just the things that are stated in this budget book. And I'm thinking the council's probably the responsible ones, because we're the ones that keep saying, yes, we'd like this one more thing, and we'll just add 200,000 here, and we'll add some more money there, and we'll add a new project. And at some point, we need to say no. So that's more of a philosophical thing. I'm not sure I have a specific question to apply it to, but things have definitely changed in my 10 years on this council.
So I just want to clarify, the 3% you're taking each year, that's over the 2 years, you're taking 4 years of bank capacity over the 2 years? Is that correct?
It's calculated more in terms of dollars that you're taking than years. It comes to about 295,000 of the almost 600,000. So you're taking about half of it, actually. So really over 4 years.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Smith.
Since Councilmember Curtis said it is a philosophical discussion and a council discussion, I think it's worth having a discussion, because I remember asking this question, and we'd talk about the lines of revenue and expenses, and it was, Brent, don't worry, we never get there. We are continually getting there, and we're doing a lot more than we were when I started. It's not a bad thing. It just depends how you want to look at it. And it costs more because we are doing more. And we have a city manager that is very efficient about getting things done. And so I do think it's a discussion worth having, and I do think we need to rein it in a bit.
Can I add some thoughts to that? So I do think there's the underlying cause of just status quo expenditures rising faster than the revenues we're bringing in. So even if you did not add one more thing to your budget, one more program, one more position, if you added nothing more to your budget, you're still going to have your lines cross in approximately 2021. That said, it is true that things have been added over the years. So for example, when Kirkland annexed North Kirkland, we were forced to add a police officer to provide the 2-officer minimum coverage, because we were sharing coverage with the unincorporated county officers. So we added a police officer back in 2012, and we've also added a volunteer and event specialist, and we've added a finance tech 2011, 2012. So we've added different positions over the years to keep up with workload demand, but also to enhance the services we provide the community. This budget also includes the incubator, which has a net cost of about a little over 100,000 a year. Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So we have added things. They haven't been huge things. They haven't, but they have been incremental things, and they do add up.
Deputy Mayor?
Joanne, do you, and I know I've seen this number before, and I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine, but what, to the average homeowner in Kenmore, what does the 1% translate to in their property tax bill? And I apologize for throwing you this curveball. I should have rewatched the meeting before I was elected in 2012 when Bob Hensel went over all this with you in depth, but it was quite a grilling. I remember it. It was interesting.
Well, I'm thinking back to the average home cost, let's say, now is $500,000. The rate is roughly around $1.13, I think, this last year.
So we're talking 1.3 cents per thousand?
Well, yeah, a 1% is not very much. And when the AV is rising, the rates are dropping. And in fact, the way in my calculations this year, because the assessed valuation is continuing to rise, even a 3% increase in the levy, the rate would be lower than it was last year. But if you'd like some of that historical information, I keep track of it.
I just think it'd be helpful because a lot of people, when they hear about a 1% increase, they're thinking about a 1% of their total property bill.
Yes.
And we're talking about 1% of the city's portion, which is, what, like a third maybe of somebody's property tax bill?
Of the total property tax
Yeah.
bill? Oh,
Yeah.
it's about 12%. 12%.
Okay, so we're talking about 1% of 12% of your property tax bill. And I would frankly argue that we wouldn't be in this bind that we're in right now if past councils had just taken the 1%. The way that the initiative that Tim Eyman passed it was set up in such a way to tie our hands so that our revenues so our lines would cross. Tying one of our biggest revenue sources to, so we can only increase it at a rate less than inflation, is setting ourselves up for failure, and that's what he did with that initiative. Not taking the 1% for 9 years was it may not have been a burden at the time for the city, but long-term, the revenue loss just from compound entry, just from the compounding effect and everything else is substantial. I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now if past councils hadn't done that for 9 years straight. I think, yeah, we probably do need to catch up. We do need to make sure that we're spending our money wisely. But as the city manager's kind of spelled out, we're in a place right now where, without looking at a lot of other stuff, we're not going to be able to pay the bills in a couple of years. And I think the property tax is a fairly low-paying way to do it, especially if we're just talking a couple percent here. And such a small part of that. So I don't have a problem with this proposal.
So as our second mayor, Dick Taylor used to say, that 1% is a cup of coffee a day. Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, so it is, I just calculated approximately, the 3% increase is approximately, for the average household, I think it's about $20 is what it factors out to, just so you know. But that misses what I think is a bigger point. And the bigger point is that had we been taking the 1%, we would have increased our costs because we would have had probably a higher level of fixed costs slowly creeping in and variable costs. And then you're in more of a bind because you're stuck at the 1%. And this point, if we use 50% of our bank capacity, but we don't structurally change how we're approaching business, we're just going to be in this exact same position in a few years, but then we won't have options. And I think that's a fundamental difference. I agree. I actually don't so much have a problem with the $20 or the additional tax amount. I have more of a problem with the fact that we're just continually spending too much relative to what we're taking. Yeah.
And I think if former councils would have taken the 1%, we would have spent it, and I think we might have still been in the same position.
You spend what you have. Every year we never have enough money to do all the things we want to do.
Councilmember Curtis.
I will just say, I'm not necessarily saying we made bad decisions, and I really like the addition of the priority-based budgeting to give some structure to our whole budget process.
I appreciate that you see some value in that. We talked as a staff this year about trying to make this less of just an academic exercise and or more of a useful tool. And so that's why we are bringing more of that conversation into the budget discussions and into the budget itself. And our plan is to continue talking about it as we go into the new year. Even though we may have set a budget, it's not too late to inform us that we might have made other decisions or will want to make other decisions down the road as we look at what we do and how effective it is to get to the results that you want. So there will be more of that, and I have something fun that I want to show you when we get to that point in a few slides.
I think the structural fix is at the state level on how cities receive revenues. When your largest source of revenue can only grow by 1%, that's not a recipe for success. I think state law needs to be changed so that property tax can grow with CPI. We could cut 5 programs and drop our expenditures down, but we'll still catch up again. Or we could add $1 million in taxes and buy us some more time, but we'll still catch up again because our largest source of revenue is only limited to 1% growth.
I think there's been a philosophical change too over the years, in that we used to save, and it used to take us longer to do things, but we saved until we had the funds to do it. And I think that's changing somewhat now, in that we're doing more and not necessarily having saved for the funds. And so I think there's been a basic change in philosophy.
Okay. So do we need to talk more about the property tax calculation and how it's presented in the budget? As I said, I believe last week or the week before, I was a little surprised at the low new construction number. And if that is an indicator of, where that development climate is going, I anticipate 2020 will be lower still. And so that's how I budgeted it for 2020. But we saw a lot of rise in double new construction, just a few years ago. So I hope it doesn't fall off too much.
Why are we seeing a decrease
in new construction?
Well, no, I'm ahead of you. Go ahead.
Okay.
You'll get to it.
Okay. And sales?
Councilmember Shrevenick, did you have something?
Well, yeah, I kind of want to go back to Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Curtis's comments, because I'm particularly troubled by the potential getting up to the same point and no longer having significant bank capacity left. So I don't know, I haven't done this before, but, so I'm not sure where it fits, but I mean, is there a way to show, what would staff prioritize for if we had to cut things to get it back to the 1%, or not? I mean, I guess I'm not sure how to articulate the question. I mean, basically, if we were to try to not do the 3%, is there a way to show what the impact would be, I guess?
Well, it would be about a $300,000 impact, and
For the biennium.
For the biennium, right. We would sit down again and start looking at the programs that we've budgeted and some of the few new things that we've proposed and debate whether those still make sense. I mean, the bank capacity is only one source of your future taxing capacity. Cities who have taken the 1% every year don't have bank capacity, and that's okay. And we've lost that compounding that we could have had we taken it every year, little by little. The compounding effect is pretty great, as you can see just in the 2 years that we're talking about it. But there's nothing magic about it if it's here or gone. There's other taxing avenues you can take, and there are expenditure reductions that we can talk about. And, you know, it's a great topic for a retreat to look at programs and determine which ones are giving you the best results for the community.
Councilmember Smith.
So I just, because I think I know what you're asking, and it's very similar to what I was thinking a lot about over the last week, and that is how reasonable, and I've never done this since I've been on the council, but how reasonable is it to say, and this is one person speaking, obviously, but to say, bring us a budget with not a 3% tax increase compounded for the next 2 years. And maybe it is 1%, or, I mean, that's a different, but I guess the point is still the same. It's kind of what you're touching on, which is we can pick and choose the little things, because when you go through this, you can kind of see things that you don't know enough about, and it's tough to pick and choose on the nitpicky things. It's the bigger things that we as a council, I think, can control a little easier, but maybe there is a way to actually direct that and say, we want it, assuming that's the will. We're not there yet, and I know I'm not trying to get ahead of the thing. Your question, I think, is a good one, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about. How do you get there in the most efficient way?
Well, if I understood your question, and having listened to the discussion a bit, if you wanted to, go right to those on a programmatic basis, where are we spending money that does not score as highly against those results, we have that information. And there's a bar graph in this presentation that shows you the different quartiles, if you will, of where we're spending our money, and from highest to lowest. And, you could potentially go right to that lowest quartile and say, okay, these are the things that we are doing that don't have the most impact on our goals, and dig through those. That's how I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's likely to be a number of small things, might not be any one big thing, but until you go through that exercise, I couldn't say.
Councilmember Curtis.
If we did something like that, I could see us adding people or GIS things or other things that we need and subtracting in other areas. So just because, like, we aren't in a catastrophe now. And I'm thinking more proactively, how can we prevent ourselves from getting there? And so you can both be adding and subtracting at the same time, as long as your net doesn't keep going up too fast.
Absolutely, that's the whole point of it. I want to do this. How can I free up resources somewhere else to do something that you get a bigger bang for your buck? Absolutely.
I guess I'm inclined to proceed with your discussion, and because I don't think we're going to solve this one tonight, because you can see we're all sort of thinking about it, but to go ahead and do your presentation, and then we'll think about it somewhere in this process.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor.
And from a structural standpoint, as we do the budget, at some point, we will have an ordinance in front of us related to the property tax.
Yes, you will.
When we adopt the final budget. So
yes,
hopefully between now and then, in late November, we'll kind of have sussed all this out.
Exactly.
Or we can make a decision when we pass that ordinance, which would complicate your life further and probably push us out in December for budget, but.
No, I mean, that's the point of all the presentations and discussion, is to see what the budget holds and make a determination by the time you talk about the levy in November, when we'll have a public hearing, and make your assessment at that time. So October basically are the departmental presentations of our programs and our activities. And then in November, we get into serious conversation about the levy and the public hearings on the budget as well. So I'll move forward into the sales tax assumption. And I think you will see that my revenue estimates are very conservative because I don't, in most cases, see a trend, radical trend upward. Most taxes are either staying the same or creeping up just a little bit. There's some that are trending downwards. Sales tax is not predicted to do as well as we did in the last biennium. One is less new construction, and the other factor is that there's no new source of retail coming in.
The recent Supreme Court decision allowing taxes on internet sales, are we going to see any benefit from that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because I know Amazon's sure collecting them.
Well, we do get some sales tax revenue off Amazon sites. And it's right up there. So it could be. I just haven't seen it yet.
Okay. I'm a good contributor to that one.
There is one, because they have some spin-off sites for specialty type products that's really pretty reliably high. So that would be huge. Could be. But I haven't seen it yet, so we will watch for it. Every month. And then utility tax, as I've mentioned in the past year, has been kind of a disappointment. I definitely feel like I over-budgeted it 2 years ago, so I brought those budgets down, especially for telephone and cell phones. Electric and gas, looking at what those revenues have been over the last 12 months is not very encouraging, so there's a bit of an increase budgeted. But I think that gas and electric are dependent upon weather and rates, but it's not a, robustly growing revenue source.
That's a really great slide because that shows you our three largest sources of revenue. And barring banked capacity, our largest gets to grow at 1%. Sales tax is going down by, what do you have? It was 5%, wasn't it?
Roughly 3 to 5.
Yeah, so we have sales tax going down by 5%. That's our second largest source of revenue. And utility tax is flat or going down.
So,
beautiful picture.
why is telephone and cell phone tax going down?
They're using the internet more.
Yeah.
They're getting rid of their landlines.
Landlines are dropping out of households.
Right.
Young
Are we
people
not getting
communicate.
revenue off of the fiber, the copper wire connections to the internet?
No, we can't tax
No.
that.
Nope.
Can we tax the phone use on that? No.
Nope, not if it's through the internet. There's Wi-Fi calling now through the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And my experience is most young people, they're texting or their Facebook message, instant messaging or private messaging, and very seldom do my children make a call with their cell phone. So, but I did find some good leads on tax auditors. I mentioned this last week or the week before, that I really think we could benefit from a utility tax auditor. So I put out some feelers, and I found a couple of sources that I think would be well worth checking into at no additional cost, because they take a cut of whatever new revenue that they find for you, but there's no fee over and above that.
So back on this, on the internet sales tax. If it goes by zip code, I mean, we're the only one with this zip code. how do they determine who gets that revenue that the state is bringing in now from the taxing of internet sales? How do we know we're getting our share of what's out there? Or are we just hoping?
I'll try and find out for you. I honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I can do some research on AWC and MRSC's site. I don't have an answer right now how we know.
I mean, I
Or
think
what
in
the
some ways we're
prediction's gonna
pretty
be.
lucky because we have the same zip code.
Right,
for
you
the
don't
entire
share it with
city, and
another
nobody else
entity.
shares it, unlike Lake Forest Park that has 2 or 3 zip codes.
Mhm.
So,
All right, I will definitely try and get more information about that next week.
Councilmember Curtis?
So I'm looking on page 30, and it's talking about other potential tax sources. So one, it says Kenmore's utility tax rate for natural gas and electricity, 4%, is less than the 6% limit allowed by state law. Now, is this different than a franchise fee or the charge for the use of our land for them to put all their lines on? Or is basically that's the same thing?
It's very similar. It's not quite the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing.
Similar but different.
So we
Similar but
charge
different.
the franchisor, the company, and then they generally pass the cost on. So it acts
Usually-
like a tax?
I've seen both a franchise fee and a utility tax charged on a utility before, but usually you have either or. You either have a utility tax or a franchise fee, not both, but I've seen both.
I have two. On cable, I've seen it both.
So I don't know if this is the time or place to discuss that, but personally, I mean, these companies are for-profit companies using our property to put in their electrical lines and gas lines, and I would personally have no problem going up to a 6%. I know it's not, it's in the lower revenue column there, but still, I don't, there may be another place to have that discussion, but.
Yeah, so the downside of that is they just pass it directly onto the consumer. They even have it as a line item on your bill. So it's not something that they absorb and take less corporate profits. They just pass it directly onto the consumer. And the utility tax is a more regressive tax than, say, property tax. So it hits the pocketbooks of low-income people harder than a property tax does. So there's ways to alleviate that, like offering a utility tax rebate, but then there's administrative costs that go with that. But yeah, but that can be. My thought for this budget was, okay, I'm keeping service levels the same, and I'm bringing you a balanced budget. Let's have a community conversation over the next year or so. It really talks about revenue sources, expenditure options, and really have a holistic, thoughtful conversation about this over the next year or so. And so, and my thought is that over this conversation that we have, things like utility tax could be on the table.
Because I do remember at one point we had the discussion of, at least my poor understanding of regressive tax. I understand that for now, you've produced a budget that's balanced, and with the in mind, we've got a big long-term problem to solve. So let's do that with the public.
So another important revenue source, similar but different, are franchise fees. And at this time, we charge a 5% franchise fee on to Frontier and Comcast Cable. And that's that revenue source predictably increases every year. I think they raise their rates predictably every year, and it's one of those services that people keep and buy more of or add on as opposed to utilities sometimes. So I've projected an increase here for Comcast and Frontier Cable. And we have a franchise fee also on water and sewer, forgot to mention that. And that's been rising at a nice 4 to 5% increase. This is a revenue source that we, in turn, then transfer to the street fund, and it helps to offset the cost of street and road maintenance and operations.
When you say in like a 5% increase, that's the cumulative increase for the whole
Over
biennium?
over 2 years.
Yeah.
Correct. And development revenues are a very significant source, both the permitting and the plan review and the land use inspections. And thankfully, Development Services helps me with these projections and budgets, and there's, not as much in the pipeline as far as they can see at this point. So we're anticipating that these will drop off a bit too in the new biennium.
And so when Brian gets up there, our development director, we could address issues like the pre-application fees or other questions, balancing those out. Yeah, okay.
You bet, sure. Next, we would have distributions from the state for liquor taxes. We get a liquor excise tax distribution and a liquor board profit distribution. And past history aside, these have gone up and down as the legislature has taken them away and given them back. So liquor excise taxes are growing. They over the 2 years, I'm projecting a 10% increase, and I use the municipal research projections for these revenues because they're very difficult to anticipate. So they provide us with a per capita rate, and that's solely the support for these revenues. And liquor board profits are static. They are not going to increase anymore unless the legislature changes something about that distribution. And then I mentioned we are trying to be very aggressive and very conscientious about charging overhead to capital projects. So with 3 engineers on board, we're trying to recover costs of about 90% of their time, either on the bridge or the walkways and waterways or other grant-funded projects, and almost as much with the planning staff, the park project managers, and a portion of the director. So that's an increase over the prior biennium. And another revenue source in here that's kind of an outlier is the Lake Point reimbursement. And again, I mentioned that we have an agreement where we can recover perhaps up to $250,000 a year in costs. So we've put the revenue on the revenue side of the books and the expense on the expense side of the books, and whatever those costs are that we can get reimbursed for, they will wash. But it is part of the revenue picture. Gambling revenues were going up for a while, and so we budgeted those a little bit more aggressively in the last biennium, and now they've dropped off. I don't know why. So it's a 22% decrease in this budget from the prior budget.
Historically, we were not looking at those, and we weren't counting on them. When did that change?
Well, I've always included and counted on these pull tabs, and because there have been a few more establishments that sell them pretty aggressively, and for $143,000 a year, I think it's important to mention.
Yeah, but 22% decrease is pretty substantial.
I don't know if one of those establishments closed. I don't know why. And you know what we noticed was during the recession, they went up, and now they've gone back down.
Yeah, I think historically we've seen other cities get in trouble trying to, or incorporating it as an important part of the budget, and so.
Yeah,
I
I wouldn't say it's
tried to do that way back when.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
No.
I wouldn't say it's an important part of the budget, but anything over $100,000 I like to look at. Also in this budget, some new things, or a little bit different things. Our reimbursement from the North Shore School District is up a bit, because now we're receiving reimbursement not only for the school resource officer, but for Moreland's maintenance agreement. So that's something new. The criminal justice distributions from the state are fairly static. They don't change very much. And then new to this budget is expenditures and revenues related to the incubator. So we have incorporated the incubator operations into the budget, so we have the incubator leases in the revenue picture. And you'll see also Kenmore Village has been incorporated into the general fund budget. And the only revenue associated with that are distributions from our property manager. So they collect the rents from our tenants, the post office, Steve Espresso, pay a lot of the bills, and then every year we ask for a cash distribution. So you'll be seeing this in the revenue discussion.
Does that include
or
then
expenditure.
also the Diva Espresso? And are we getting, I believe the lease was structured, we get a percentage once we hit a certain amount. Can you shed light on what we earn a month or a year so far now that we've got a year under our belt?
Oh, I don't remember those numbers, but I can bring them. I do know for the last 6 months, Diva has hit their sales target and has paid that additional percentage based on their exceeding their sales target. So they have continued to grow, and that revenue source has continued to climb over the last year. So I would say last 6 months, they've hit that sales target and done better than that.
Right.
And that rolls into the property manager's books and then becomes part of our distribution on an annual basis.
I think, so base rent with triple nets is about 28 a foot, and it's about 1,100 square feet. So should be getting about $30,000 a year from them.
We're specifically referring to once they hit their revenue targets.
Yeah.
And if we knew what that amount was.
We can sure get that for you.
I'd just be curious.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not 100,000.
Kelly's writing that down. This quick and dirty graph is just to show you how the adopted budget, the projected budget, and the new budget line up as far as the major revenue sources. You can see the bigger increases are in property taxes and then overhead reimbursements, of course. And this is the graph that I mentioned earlier about the PBB results that we received recently. And remember, we're looking back at the 17-18 budget, and how did we budget, and how did what did those programs cost, and as far as staff and non-personnel, and how did they score as far as meeting the results of the city. So a quartile 1 program are those programs that are essential or critical or best achieve the results that you have identified. Quartile 4 would be programs that have minimal or no effect in achieving results. So if I were just as a first step looking at places to really analyze and have a conversation about should we keep doing this or not, or are there opportunities for freeing up some of those revenues or expenditures so we can do something else, that's where I would look. And when I refer to results, those are the oval maps that start on page 33 of the budget. So you can see in quartile 4, we have $2.4 million in that quartile. So there could be some opportunities there, is all I'm going to say.
Not to be too negative, I'm feeling kind of negative tonight, but I've looked at quartile 4, the ones that score low, and guess what? A lot of them are things like unfunded mandates. We have to pay for them anyway, so we can't cut them. So it's...
So,
yeah, I mean, it's
so
not...
shouldn't, just as a thought, shouldn't that be in quartile 1 then? I mean, because we're going to be always looking to quartiles 3 and 4, I would think, when we're looking for savings, and either that or not even have them in the
Yeah, so we look at a whole host of criteria, and just one of the criteria is mandated by the state. but there's all other things. Does it add to our quality of life? Does it contribute to safety? So mandated is one of several criteria, but you're right, if it's mandated and we have to pay for it, maybe it should get a,
That might be the only reason that it scores high, but there might not be any demand for it. It might not serve more than, even 10% of the population. There might be other jurisdictions that can do it, or cost recovery is another one. So mandate is just a piece of the puzzle, and we can talk more about that too. And we can filter these programs by what are we mandated to do that we don't do for any other reason.
So maybe that's an approach to look at. Maybe it would be as part of a, going forward, looking at how we approach the budget, maybe one of it is specifically what are the mandates and what are those funding things, and then they can be removed from the priority-based budgeting quartile ranking.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I was flipping through this book, and I swear in past budgets, there's been lists with the PBB results showing where things landed quartile-wise. Maybe I'm mistaken. I know there's a way for us to access that, or at least I think there's a way for us to access that on our laptops. Could we maybe just, sometime after this meeting, just get an email with kind of, here's how we can go digging through the PBB results a little bit?
Sure.
Just because it might be a good exercise. Or if not that, just a list of the stuff in the fourth quartile.
I can give you a list. I can also show you the next slide.
Okay.
Which,
response.
well, it's not the slide. I have to go, how do I minimize this, Kelly, just to escape? So that was a picture of a site where we have a really nice new interface for looking at the results that I just brought to your attention. So this is Kenmore's site. These tabs are our results, and as you click on each result, it will show you what were the what we call the maps to getting to that result. So you can click across desirable life work, and these are all the different criteria that help us meet that. If you value diversity, these are those maps to achieving diversity and transportation. So this is a really nice, interactive, visually pleasing tool. And then when you click on one, you can go below and see all the programs become these nice boxes. And the bigger the box, the bigger the cost. The darker the box, the more relevant it is to that result.
I click on the first one and I get not found error.
Well,
capitalize the K?
you can't be logged on, so that's probably why.
Yeah,
That's why. Well, you've got a link there, but it's non-functioning.
Well, no,
No.
I actually made it work. I had to capitalize the K in Kenmore, but then it came to a login page, so.
Yeah, there's a
I'm
login
just
page.
clicking on
And
the
if
tab.
you would like a login to that page, we can set one up to you, and you can have the URL, and you can go to this page, and you can play around with it all you like. So that's the key to this. The darkest squares are the most relevant. The biggest squares are the most costly. So you can click on one and see a description of it, how it's scored, what the cost is, what the FTEs are. You can drill down further, and you can say, okay, here's the total cost, how much of it's personnel, how much of it's non-personnel, which positions are included in those personnel costs, and what are the operating costs that were assigned to it. So there's a ton of data in there that if you want to click around, you're very welcome to do that, and I can set that up for you.
So my preference would be not to mess with the whole tool, but to keep doing what we're doing and just create a special report saying unfunded mandates. And
Yes, we can
let us
do
look at
that too, sure.
Instead of taking them out of the budget. I think that will create an artifact that will throw everything else off. So there's so much data here, you can rearrange it any way you want. So I'd say pull that data aside, just get a separate report rather than creating next year a whole new methodology for doing this.
Oh, okay, no, that's totally, there's a way to do that as well. But this is the result of all that data that is available for your viewing pleasure, I guess, for as much time as you want to spend on it and look at it and generate questions from it. And this is something that, you know, may help the staff too as we move forward through the year. But there are some other resources too where we can say, we can just filter right onto the mandate or filter right onto the cost recovery or the demand. But I was pretty excited to show you this site because we all thought it was more intuitive than just the bars that we used to look at the last few years. Maybe not. But, so this was just a screenshot that I put in your PowerPoint presentation. So.
Well, maybe a screenshot, but you click on those tabs and it tries.
It does try. Well, I tried to link it, but I was not very successful at doing that. Okay, and then this next one was just kind of a definition of how that table worked. Okay, so we are going to move into the departmental budgets. If there are no questions at this point, we're going to ask the Nancy Owsley and her team to join us and talk about the council budget and the city manager's budget. Okay.
Great. Good evening. I will be brief. The city council budget is one of the smaller general fund department budgets, and as you can see, there was an increase proposed for this next biennium over the last biennium, and I can tell you exactly what represents that increase. Just a few weeks ago, the council discussed a consultant contract that was in place for staffing the mayor's very important participation on the Sound Transit Executive Board. And so that increase is pretty much equal to the size of the contract if we're to go forward over the next 2 years. And we have highlighted it on this next slide for that consultant contract. And then just listed some of the many organizations and regional and national organizations that the council is involved in, and that has been an important function of the council. And it really does pay off in many, many ways for the city. We'll go to the, we were just talking about priority-based budgeting.
Can I make a quick comment on that last slide?
Sure.
It's not a big deal, but you missed Seashore, which is something that
Sorry.
the mayor and I have spent time on.
That's a good catch. Thank you. These are the 5 highest scoring programs out of the council's budget, and I think it is, pretty indicative of the federal and state government relations, the goal setting, and what we're doing right now. The council meetings are all highly scored for the council budget. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Smith?
Does the, Nancy, does the, all the travel and lodging and all that, does that fall under like well, actually, what does that fall under on this, on the expenses on here? Or maybe Joanne, you're the one to, yes.
In the
On
budget
the
book?
table of all programs?
On page 92, there's a summary of the expenditure summary, salaries and wages, personnel benefits, supplies and services. It would be under the services line item.
Okay, so So is that all? Is that information, so the next page on 93?
So those are the PBB programs.
Yeah.
And so things like travel, registration, those kind of things are spread depending upon what activity they support, as much as we possibly can. So when we go through our exercise of allocating the line item costs, which are summarized on 92, to the programs, we say, okay, this line item is used to support these programs, and we have various ways of allocating that cost to them.
So NLC meetings then would go under appointments to, or have to do with federal-state government relations, or,
Most likely.
or to regional or national boards and commissions.
Okay, thanks.
And remember, the programs on page 93 are reflective of the 17-18 budget.
Right.
So don't try to make them match the 19-20 budget. But in most cases, you know, what we do from year to year as a whole
Right.
is pretty stable, predictable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I could go on about PBB and how we do it if you had the time, but we don't. So I don't think that's really what would be as. Okay. Well, that PBB program won't tell you that specifically, because it's more of a program budget, not a line item budget. And we got away from doing line item budgets several budgets ago. But if you have a question about a specific type of expense, we can still give you that information.
It's just from a structural standpoint, to me, personally, I don't have a problem with what the expenses were. I just remember seeing them in the past, and it's, if you are trying to cut costs, that's one area you can look at. You can actually then, you could look at it and go, okay, this is what we're spending every year on going to DC or going to this or that or whatever. And so it's just, it allows you to have a mechanism in place to look at how maybe that's something that can be looked at.
Sure.
And so that's what, with this, the way it's set up, there's really no way to know, is there room for improvement here? And that's, I guess, what I was trying to get at.
No, I totally understand. And that information is always available if you desire it and request it, sure.
It's just funny how it's like all these pages and you still don't have really what you oftentimes are looking for. It's nobody's fault. It's just you can't be expected to pull everything together on every single issue.
Yeah, and I think you can find a lot of the travel stuff in the checks in the consent agendas, but you have to parse all out. So I agree with you that it'd be helpful to have it all summarized, or at least available in the budget.
And that, I know it's a fair amount, is because I see those and it's like, okay, well, that's a lot, they can.
I'll add one more thing that is included in the city council's budget, and that is dues for some of the national and regional organizations, like Puget Sound Regional Council,
ETP.
National League of Cities, so those are generally in the council's budget. There are a few of those that are also in city manager's budget, for example.
Deputy Mayor.
You just set me up, Nancy. You just set me right up. So I had mentioned all this to you guys before also. but I want to add one more membership to this list if possible. And that's the King County Cities Climate Collaboration. I assume you all saw the news last week with the UN report about climate change. Showed that to prevent 2.7 degrees of warming, greenhouse pollution needs to be reduced by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and 100% by 2050. This has been an all hands on deck situation for a while now, but this really kind of brought it to the fore for a lot of folks. We have as little as 12 years to actually make a dent. Otherwise, we may see some catastrophic results. I'm not arguing that Little Kenmore is going to make a difference all by ourselves, but joining up with a majority of the cities in King County, I think, and gaining access to the resources that that they have, that the collaboration has, would help us with things like green building codes, figuring out ways to incentivize solar, things like that. I think that's, and this is what Ms. Graylin brought up earlier, I think this is probably the absolute minimum we can do when it comes to dealing with climate change, which is something that we haven't really ever tackled as a council. So I would like to move to add membership dues for K4C to the council budget for 2019 and 20, and direct staff to come back to the council to approve the interlocal agreement to formally join the coalition. It's about $1,200 a year. They may bump it after this year, I'm not sure, but it's $1,200 right now.
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded. I guess the question that I have and have had, this tends to be a staff organization, elections. Electeds have an hour or 2-hour meeting twice a year, but staff is expected to meet every month. What kind of burden will this put on city staff?
My recommendation is we look at the agenda ahead of time, see if it's worthwhile going, and based on other priorities and things that we have going on at the time, make the call. And if we have time, and if the agenda is productive, then we go.
And I would think that if we joined the organization, we would be going all the time. But I see your point.
I don't think there's any expectation that staff be at every meeting. I mean,
Right, but I mean, if we're going to get something out of it, we should be going to it.
it's also a resource that you can reach out to when you're trying to tackle a specific issue. So,
Councilor Shrubnik.
My understanding is the resource is there regardless, so, yeah, so, I've never been clear about the value out of this particular organization. I'm certainly in favor of the impetus and the concepts, and I think we could probably do more to reduce our carbon footprint than we are, but I don't know that this is the mechanism. We could probably do more by just traveling less. Anyway, I think there's a lot of other ways to, rather than increasing our costs in this way.
Any further discussion? Councilor Smith?
Actually, was this the one we got the report on like a month ago?
Yeah,
or
a couple
yeah,
months ago.
it's the one that came and presented.
And I can't recall didn't we discuss it after, or did we? Did we just,
It was discussed that we'd bring it up during budget.
okay.
I'm just following through.
Yeah. and
No,
this is-
no, you're doing a fine job.
They've forgotten.
Sorry.
I can't remember enough about it, believe it or not. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I guess my point is
All right, so we have a motion to have staff come back with in budget funds for the membership in C4C. Absolutely.
So what does our city manager really think about this? Or does he know? I mean, I actually would really like his opinion on the value of the organization and just candid thoughts.
And Nancy, you're welcome to join in too. To me, it's, I think it's making the statement that we're part of this group and adding our voice So you can't put a dollar figure on that, but I think there is value to being on a list of other cities and saying, oh, Kenmore's there, and just making that voice even stronger by adding ours to it. So it's more of a symbolic thing. I'm sure we'll get value from being part of the conversation and what we learn from the meetings and stuff, but it's more of a symbolic statement in my mind.
You said it needs a council member to go every couple times a year. Do we have somebody, a representative?
The
that-
deputy mayor.
I'd be happy to go. I
Okay,
mean, I
great.
was at their elected officials meeting just a couple weeks ago because they were inviting whoever wanted to stop by, so.
I'll just also add that, there are a lot of intergovernmental initiatives and groups in King County, and I think we're a smaller organization. We don't have the number of staff people, technical people that the county or Bellevue or certainly Seattle has. But like Rob said, you pick and choose what meetings are the most relevant, and get from it what you can, and weigh that against the other responsibilities that staff have. So I think there's a way to benefit from it.
And if I remember correctly, dues are minimal. It's like $1,500 a year, so.
It's 1,200, at least right now, they might
Yeah,
bump up a little bit.
It's a
but
very minor amount.
The price
so.
of a fancy gym membership.
That's right. Unless you're old and you
The
get
people
one free.
also
That's
don't
right there.
CrossFit
Yes,
membership.
you can, trust me. All right. So a motion on the table then is to join C4C.
K4C.
Is it K4C? I thought it was C4C.
K4C.
K4C. Okay. You're sitting there.
It's really exciting. I like
So
this
you
view.
can take the roll then.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Councilmember Shrevenick.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Passed.
We can add our voice to the list.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Any other questions from you on the city
Yes.
councils?
There is. I'm just curious. In our budget, we have city manager oversight. Is that him overseeing us or us overseeing him? Not very clear.
Also known as city manager cracking the whip on you, or vice versa. I'm not sure which.
Okay.
All right.
Do we have council oversight in the city manager's budget? As an item?
Well,
As a
you're
program?
about to find out.
As a program?
Okay.
My intro?
Yes. All right, so this is the city manager's office budget. And let me just get there. So that includes me being the CEO of the city, but also it includes a lot of programs. It includes economic development and communications and events and volunteer services and public records and receptionist and several other things. So we actually have quite a bit of activity going on in the city manager's office, and some very busy people who love what they do. But I think I think the main thing with the city manager's budget is, with the city manager's office, is that we handle a lot of the, not just the leadership for the organization, but a lot of the outreach and coordination with the community. So,
Certainly. This is one department budget that is smaller going into the next biennium than it was for the 17-18 biennium. And I'll explain, some of the reasons for that in a second. I'd like to call your attention to the fact that receptionist is plural in this, because you might recall that the front desk reception position is filled by two part-time people that overlap at the early afternoon hour, and so far that is working out just fabulously for us. And as you know, there was a part-time programming coordinator with us this past year, helping with Town Square and hangar programming, other events. We are pleased tonight to have two people from our staff who haven't been through a biennial budget before. Becky Range, who is the communications specialist, and Shelby Crow, who is events and volunteer supervisor. But we'll go on to the next slide and give you a few highlights about the budget. You'll hear soon from the city clerk's office that human service programs were previously in the city manager's budget, and for this next biennium and actually presently, they have been taken on by the city clerk's office. So that is you'll hear about the funds that are being recommended for human service agencies, and so that is now in the city clerk's budget. So that moved out of city manager's office, but the business incubator program is proposed to be part of general fund and in the city manager's office for this next biennium. And it has been since its inception in 2013 in the Strategic Opportunities Fund. A couple of other highlights. The general fund contribution to the ARCH, which stands for Regional Coalition for Housing. Trust fund remains the same in the general fund, but when we get to the Strategic Opportunities Fund discussion later on, you'll see that there's been that is proposed to be increased with monies from the Strategic Opportunities Fund. But in the general fund, city manager's office, it remains the same as it has been at $30,000 per year. Another highlight to the proposed budget, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is an upgrade to our website, which is overdue. And Rob, you kind of already spoke to the central role that this office plays, with the big redevelopment projects, Rob and I like to call that the trifecta of Kenmore redevelopment: the downtown, Lake Point, and the seminary rehabilitation.
yeah, I think a big workload item for Nancy, and to a lesser degree me, is going to be Sound Transit 3. So Nancy is our point person on bus rapid transit, and she interacts frequently with Sound Transit on that issue, and she coordinates with me and John Vicente, and
hopefully our two council members that are on the legislative committee. But yeah, that's going to continue to be a big part of our workload for the next couple of years.
Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So economic development is one thing that we were talking with you about in recent months, because we updated our economic development strategy this year. And I'll just really quickly roll through what the goals in that strategy are, because I think you're going to be seeing, not only in our work program, but in other departments' work programs, things that will line up with these strategies, not only for this budget, but for a couple of biennial budgets in the future. So the first one is to promote Kenmore's image. The second goal is grow new and existing businesses and target sectors. Number 3, enable high-quality retail, office, and mixed-use development. 4 is leverage placemaking and livability for economic development, and we've certainly seen that with the town square and hangar this year. Goal 5 is expand access to the waterfront and connect to multimodal transportation. And number 6 is highlight Kenmore's welcoming business climate. So with that, you see the kinds of things that are in the work plan and budget for this next biennium. And as I mentioned, the Kenmore Business Incubator moves into the general fund in this proposed budget. That budget, ever since program was created in 2013, the overall budget has decreased each biennium, and the revenue from clients has increased each biennium. This year we are proposing a slight addition so that we can better serve the clients that we have, and that is to add a few more hours each month to the business our business development consultant time, so that our growing list of companies who are our clients in this program can meet with him and participate in other group kinds of activities. So that will be one change for the business incubator budget. It'll get a little bit bigger over this biennium in order for us to serve our clients more frequently and more completely. With the incubator, I will say that we have generally been at about 20 to 25 businesses that we are serving at any one time. And you'll probably recall, too, that something that the incubator has been involved in but is not part of this budget is activities that we've done with Port of Seattle grant funds over the last couple of years. And that enabled us to actually serve an additional about 30 to 35 businesses in business training classes. And we also got revenue from those businesses who took part in that. So it's been a very busy biennium in economic development, and we look forward to having another busy biennium coming forward. And I always like to say that everyone in our organization plays a role in economic development. So those strategies that I rolled through quickly, I know you're going to see in different people's work programs. And by the way, that is one thing that we're not spending money on this year, is updating the economic development strategy, since we completed that in the last biennium. So I'm going to let Becky roll through marketing and communications. It's on if it's up.
So most of our requests for marketing and communications really haven't changed. I do want to touch a little bit briefly on the website upgrade because you might have a few questions about that. So one of the things that I want to say when I think about what our community engagement strategy should be for our community, you're always going to hear me say what's best for the community, what's the easiest way for the community to get information from us and to understand what we're doing, and also what's most efficient. And so right now, our website is the foundation for all of that information and all of that community engagement. And don't think so much about the look and feel of the current website, but if you think about the back end of that website, we actually picked the back end of that website about 6 years ago. We call that the content management system. And that content management system is getting a little bit dated. Technology moves very quickly. It's a system called Drupal. You might be familiar with it, but it's actually a little bit difficult for our staff to keep updated. We're not able to be as nimble as we'd like to be. We're not able to keep the website as clean and fresh and relevant as we would like to be able to do. So that's one issue for us. If we devote a little bit more funds to maybe an upgraded back-end system, we'll be able to make that product easier for our community to look at. But probably one of the most critical things, and I don't know if you're aware of this, scammers are getting really, really good. So in the last 3 to 6 months, our website has actually been hacked multiple times by scammers. They're search engine optimization scams. Nothing too nefarious, but what happens is scammers set up a series of pages with our website information and redirects, and so it creates a problem for us on the internet, and also creates a problem for us as we try to update our web content. Our users sometimes aren't able to do that. We've got probably 4 to 5 staffers that are web admin, and they're not able to go in and update things when we're having those security issues. So we wanted to devote a little bit of money to rectifying that over the next couple of years. Any questions on that?
Deputy Mayor.
So, I mean, I haven't been on the council that long. I think I'm in my 5th year now. And I remember when we set up the last site, so it's not that long ago. What are we looking at for costs on this?
Well, that's a great question. We've been studying it for the last several weeks because there's a couple of different things we could have done. We can stay with the current content management system, but what we would need to do is actually start paying web maintenance and a service provider contract. With the system that we're using right now, I got in one estimate from one company, and even if it's a little bit high, just that annual cost is about $36,000. But we could actually move to a more city industry specific back-end system and migrate all that content over for around $40,000 to $45,000. And one of the things that we've really been studying to make sure we're being efficient is if we move to that type of back-end system, we can also eliminate some other costs that we're paying right now that don't really work with our current website. For example, our email delivery system is separate from our website. So we pay $12,000 a year just to be able to have that email subscription service, and it doesn't even really integrate with our current website. So Joanne asked us to really study all the numbers and to try to see what is the most efficient and cost effective, and maybe not just over these next 2 years, but the future years. So when you start to think about the cost savings, and the new systems are so much more efficient, you save a lot of staff time not having to update things. So that's pretty important to think about.
So $40,000 to $45,000 one-time cost, and then you'll see a $12,000 a year savings in that email distribution.
You'll eliminate
thing.
the $12,000 a year, and then also if we get to because the new systems are so efficient and so much better, you can then start to incorporate things at a lower cost. Right now we're kind of limited. We have a separate web page for hangar reservations. We can't easily do payment processing online, or if we do, we have to pay extra for that. So if we move to this some of the newer systems, it's all included. For example, the email delivery system is completely included in that cost. So.
What are we paying currently? I'm just trying to get a sense. We're saving $12,000, but what are we paying for our website right now?
Well, we actually don't currently have maintenance and a service provider contract for the website. So, I think we just didn't need it kind of in the beginning, but we do pay for things like a site improve contract, which is something that kind of crawls our site to see where we have missing links and those types of things. That's $7,000 to $8,000 a year, I believe. And then one of the things that we are also really interested in is online community engagement. That's kind of where everyone wants to engage, right? With you and with us.
But that's all happening on like Nextdoor or Facebook.
Well, it is in some ways, and in some very unofficial ways. But what we do now is we often will have a survey for a project and then another survey for a different issue or a project. With the new back-end system, we can have one integrated engagement portal, and you can have all of your information in one place. And that's what all of our.
I'm sorry, I couldn't
That's
get
okay.
the last half sentence. I apologize.
That's what all of our other
But you do
cities are
know how to
doing.
get to that place, right?
I'll go down 68th. So I'm sorry, what was the last little bit there?
Well, so a lot of other cities are using more of one online engagement tool, and it's very powerful if you use that technology.
And I'm just curious because I have some minor connect, but what sort of
Use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto Northeast Bottle Way.
what provider or what backend are you looking at?
There's about 3 to 4 main website vendors that handle cities. That's their specialty.
Okay.
And I think we've already started to kind of evaluate all of those. And they're really good at it. It's what they do.
Like Granicus and that sort of thing? Or?
Yeah, so Granicus is a great example. Granicus, bought Vision, who's an internet provider, and now that they've joined forces, they're making things pretty seamless with your email delivery and things like that. And those are all things that we're studying because we just really want to be efficient. And I think we could be a little bit more efficient than what we are right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I have a question on the website. If there's one thing that I could ask, and I'm the last person that should be given technological advice at any level, but I think it would be really helpful to have some of the common current, just a little button that stands out. I would actually prefer even less, even though I like the photos on the homepage, they're great, but I think if we could have 2 or 3, like, all the Lake Point info, just click here, a big old button that says Lake Point, everything answered, and the proposed budget. It would be great to have it where you don't have to go try to navigate to find it. And so just some of the really current things, if we could have 2, 3, 4 buttons that just jump out at you, I think that would be a huge public benefit.
We completely agree. And that's one of the limitations with our current website. It's a pretty sophisticated back-end system. And the website admins here, we're not coders, we're not real tech people. The new city websites, that's exactly how they're designed, is to allow us to highlight information, highlight issues, link to different things, and to really make it easy for the community. And one of the things that we really, really like about the new websites is they've also made it so that if you were in an emergency situation, there's a click of a button where your whole website switches to emergency communications mode. So they're really designed specifically for cities, and you would see a real improvement if we did that.
And you know what, it'll probably save a lot of headaches on the CARS requests and stuff. When people know where information is, they get it, and it's easy to spread factual information rather than lies.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
So, thank you, Becky. And we'll hear from Shelby Krogh, another wonderful member of our team, on events and volunteers.
Thank you, Nancy.
So in 2019, 2020, we will continue to focus on events that have been popular in the community, which includes the summer concerts, the 4th of July fireworks show, the Why I Love Kenmore summer party, the tree lighting, and I'm sorry that it was not included on this list, but the outdoor movies as well. We will consolidate Playday into the Why I Love Kenmore event and move the Why I Love Kenmore event to June to be more mindful of staff capacity. And I'd like to thank those council members who had input on that decision. The town square and hangar continues to be wildly popular in our community, and there's high demand for the spaces in the hangar. We are coming up on our 1-year anniversary of taking reservations and are just shy of 1,000 reservation requests. And so the 2019-2020 budget will allow us to maintain the current reservation system and website. And as Becky mentioned, if we move forward with a different website system, we may be able to integrate the cost of the reservation software into that. That may be something that's included. We're seeing a steady increase in volunteerism, especially with one-time and event volunteers, and need to replace some essential supplies and tools. We'll also be slightly adjusting our recognition techniques in the coming year as we sort of see this new and different modern volunteer sort of come out of the woodwork, and it's something that a lot of other city volunteer coordinators are talking about. We'll also continue to support community events such as the Hydroplane Cup and other key festivals, especially events that bring money and visitors into the city. So overall, we'll be really just maintaining the course with events and volunteerism.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
I think these are probably just examples, right? Because I mean, like the movies are not there, and I mean, there's yeah.
Yes, yes.
So,
My apologies,
yeah.
they were left off.
Yeah. So a couple things. You know, I'm all about the fun, right? And I love what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And I think the rec position is somewhat getting absorbed across departments. I don't know where that gets brought up, whether that's this section or some other section. So what I'm wondering about this in particular is kind of the extent to which, and this is kind of a Joanne question maybe, the extent to which the actual events, not the staff support, but the actual events are funded by the city versus funded by sponsors, because I'm just thinking, is there a way to leverage sponsors more than we do?
That's a good question. So we've actually seen quite an increase in sponsorship from local community businesses in the last several years. If you look back, as you know, even 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at event sponsorship from community sponsors on a yearly basis, you know, between 10 and 13,000. Last year we brought in about 25,000. This year over 30,000, and we're expecting similar numbers next year. So we do spend most of the winter and spring looking for community businesses and large sponsors to help offset a lot of those costs. That's how we're able to.
Do we know what percentage they're offset? I mean, I'm just thinking like,
Not
you
off the
know,
top of my head.
the 4th of July fireworks, some organization could just say, that's going to be ours, you know, sponsored by blah.
Certainly.
You know, I mean, that's what they've done, you know, in Seattle and other places. You know, same with summer concerts, maybe less so with the Why I Love Kenmore Summer Party, although Main Street certainly takes part in that. But, you know, outside of that, I'd like to, you know, really push that envelope as much as we could on that. And the other thing, I've always thought, you know, all of these are great. They're heavily focused on the summer. And, I mean, the only other thing we have is, like you said, the hydro races, and I'm aware we have nothing in the fall. We have a lot of breweries. You know, they could easily do a Oktoberfest. I know that's a derivative, but, I mean, you know, something that would, you know, be nice to maybe think, and I know you can do this, is kind of think strategically about the whole year and how do we spread the fun a little bit.
That's a really good point, and our team is so busy in the summer.
Right, exactly.
And so I think that Why I Love Kenmore is actually going to move a little earlier in the season. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we'll be moving it. The last 2 years we've held it in the end of August. And August is our heaviest month of the year. There are some weeks where we have up to 4 large-scale events in a week. So we'll be moving the Why I Love Kenmore event into June. I know there have been questions about whether weather would impact it, and we learned this year that there's really no guarantee. It rained for the 8 hours prior to Y I Love Kenmore this year, and we set up in the pouring rain. So, you know, I think we have just as much chance of sunny weather in June as we do in August, unfortunately. But thank you, Councilmember Shrevenick. That's a good point, that we could be looking at other times of the year to hold events. And we've looked at what other cities are doing and are trying to, you know, somewhat follow their models, and we have some room, some wiggle room.
And really leverage those sponsorships. I mean, you know, maybe even, I don't know if there's more room to do that. But, and does the rec coordinator, where does that fit in the conversation? I don't want to miss it.
Yeah, I think now is the best time to bring it up.
Oh, at 10:10, really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know we had some discussion of that, and I know that it's not on the table. I do want to recognize that staff are already doing some of the tasks that are, actually, they haven't seen the job description. That never went
but,
out,
you know,
right? So then it's irrelevant.
If they
Yeah.
turn to page 24 of the city manager budget message, that captures
Yeah,
the
that's true.
essence of it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, suffice it to say, staff are already doing some of these things, and I just want to recognize that, and so this is an effort to kind of consolidate, you know, at this juncture, I think this is, you know, maybe what needs to happen, just because we don't have more budget, but I think the one sticky point that I have, well, there was two. One of them is going to be addressed with Becky, I think, with the website and the media piece. But the other sticky point is, you know, we've got Rob in this funny position of essentially being the point person, and I
For
still.
KWAC. Or
Okay, so for any other vendor coming in, Steve's contract, anything like that would come along, you're not? It would be somebody else?
Oh, yeah. So I'm not the point of contact for a lot of things, like Skate Like a Girl and Skyhawk. Is it Skyhawks? Yeah. Skyhawks, things like that.
Oh, okay, so that's somebody else. Okay.
Yeah, that's Shelby.
Okay.
I do have KWAC, and I do have the kayak concession. I think those are the two I have. But,
Okay.
so our model is to kind of decentralize
Yes.
and spread it like peanut
Clearly.
butter across all the organization. I think Shelby and I probably have the bulk of them. But
Okay.
Shelby more so than me, but
Okay.
there's other folks involved too.
Okay.
But you and I talked about a part-time option where
Yeah,
you're still,
yeah, and again, without kind of exploring it, I mean, the full-time option was, you know, clearly a fair amount of money, but, and I guess I mean, my biggest concern was, you know, having Rob in this position, and also the confusion and the particularly leadership around the KWAC, but I think there may be, you know, there may be other ways that can be worked on. I do want us at some point to consider the part-time piece. Again, I'm, you know, making the case that, you know, you just look at, there are no other cities of, as I said before, no other cities of our size, or anywhere near our size, half our size, that don't have a point person. And I actually think that issue is going to come up as soon as you do the website. I mean, there's going to, you know, there's going to have to be, for more information, I mean, I don't know how we're going to get around that without naming something, even if it's just an email address. That email address has to go to somebody. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we're going to completely get around that. So, just saying.
Okay, next slide. Here are the top scoring programs from priority-based budgeting in the city manager's office. You've heard about just about all of them so far. So with that, if there are any other questions, happy to take them.
Deputy Mayor.
maybe you covered this, and maybe I missed it, and if so, I apologize. I just noticed that there's a big increase in the services between the 17-18 biennium and the 19-20 biennium. Is there a reason why? Could you just go over why it went from 785 to 1.1?
Tell us the number again.
I'm sorry, under services,
Yeah.
it went from 785K to 1.1 million. I'm just curious what that increase was.
Page 100.
So part of that is, got to be the human service, or, no, because we transferred human services, never mind.
I am not sure how that was aggregated. I've been more in the weeds. I can mention two consultant contracts that we have, and these will be, you know, short-term. One is, you may have heard that Corps of Engineers has funding to do sediment sampling in the navigation channel. And so we are proposing to work with the same consultant that helped a few years ago from Anchor QEA. And so that is a new line item or a new task under consultant services. We're hoping if not by the end of this year, then early next year, to have a new franchise agreement with Puget Sound Energy. And we've budgeted, again, not a lot of money, but some for to be able to use that energy reliability expert firm. When those annual reports come in about reliability across the different circuits, we'd like to have their help in deciphering those.
Okay. We're also going to be, the incubators consulting services are in this line item too, which is a new line item. But we'll get you the more detailed breakout, just
Okay. Thanks.
So you know.
Councilmember Curtis?
So are we going to discuss human services in more detail here, or in the city clerk budget?
In the city clerk's budget.
Councilmember Schroeder?
Is the GIS under this, where is that piece?
It's in the finance budget coming up.
Coming up, okay.
Yep. Right. Thank you.
We want to keep going?
No.
No.
No?
And
No. No?
and I had another question about this one, too.
Okay.
Because I didn't know where the other one went. So I know there's a lot of restructuring, too, of staff, and how many, in this new proposed budget, how many direct reports do you have now, Rob? Or are you being proposed, because I think there's more direct reports now.
Getting a net increase of 2, so
Right.
yeah, because
Public Works.
I
and-
had John
Right,
Vicente, and I still do, and then I'm adding.
Right.
No, and I already had Jennifer. Well, so if you compare to when I had the Public Works Director,
Right.
that's a net increase of 2 direct
2,
reports.
right, so how many is that total?
I don't know.
It's a lot.
5, 6, 7, 8, something like that.
Oh, okay.
Probably about 8.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah, Councilmember Smith?
Nancy, do you know the approximate amount of the analysis contract for the sediment material? For our analysis that you said we're hiring some,
I believe we're allowing about 30,000. I'd have to go back and look for.
That's the right number.
Yep.
Yeah, 30,000 for 1 year.
so are there other expenses also associated with that? Because I know we just talked about it in our legislative agenda last week about the dredging, and I'm just curious if there was other, because I know the Corps was paying for a lot of it. I didn't know we had a $30,000 expense on that end of it. I'm just
You know,
curious what else is
and we may not need all of that, you know, when all is said and done. There are no other expenses for the city for the testing.
Thanks.
It looks like items 10 and 11 are crossed in the agenda. So, next should be staff report.
Check your boxes before you go tonight. And you have 2 city council meetings next week, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. That's all I have.
Councilmember reports, initiatives. Councilmember Smith.
Gosh, I forgot to write it down, so I don't have anything.
Councilmember Marshall.
Speaking of local and regional other entities and all that, if anybody's interested in the WR8, we're able to make that.
WR8, yep.
Those meetings are during the day, my work day, so looking for somebody new to pass the torch to.
That's always a struggle to get Wire 8 covered. Okay. Councilmember Curtis.
I have 2 things. Went to ETP last week, and they, one of the discussions was the 3-week SR 99 closure, and they explained why it was necessary to actually be closed for 3 weeks, because they have the little building to do on each end to make things connect up right. And they had a really great 6-page handout. Has anybody seen this come through their email? If not, I'm thinking maybe we could scan it in and send it to people. It was really great. I thought a great summary.
I'm sure we
So
can-
if I give it to the clerk.
I'm sure we can get that from staff from ETP. I'm sure they've got that.
And then the second thing that I'm going to let Nigel do is the legislative priorities for ETP. And then the second one I have is simple and yet a little emotional on my part. So I'm going to make a request that in the future, people don't refer to me as Dr. Curtis, but refer to me as Councilmember Curtis. And the rationale is that while I'm still a doctor, there are other people on this council who are doctors as well. I stopped practicing medicine actively a year ago in September, and I've made a decision. The computer killed me, so that's why I'm not doing patient care. And I let my license lapse, and I'm not doing my CME, and so I'd prefer just to be Councilmember Curtis.
All right. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Nothing to add.
Along that line, Alaska Way opened today. The old Alaska Way under the viaduct is no more. It's now back along the waterfront. Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing to add.
Deputy Mayor.
So, yeah, I appreciate Councilmember Curtis reminding me, because at this late time, about the legislative agenda from ETP. So at last month's meeting, I was asked by the chair, Councilmember Bounty Sanders out of Woodinville, to work with a group of folks to put together a legislative agenda for ETP. We just tonight finalized, kind of put the last little finishing touches on it. So once that kind of comes out officially, I'll forward it over to you guys. And if you have any major heartache or any red flags raised, let me know. There's nothing particularly controversial on it. It's essentially last year's ETP legislative agenda with a couple minor tweaks. But again, if you see any red flags, let me know. We can get that adjusted at November's meeting before we finalize it in December at ETP. So look for that in your inboxes.
Couple things. Somewhere, somehow, 61st Street bus stop is being closed. At least that's what's going on in Uplake. The Uplake Neighborhood Association sent us a letter, and they are bound to determine that bus stop is going away, which nothing could be further than from the truth. Can we please, I don't know what we can do to stop this rumor, but the bus stop's not moving. It's going to continue.
Social media thing, it's got a website.
Hey,
If anybody has the opportunity and talks to anybody in Uplake, Gunderson, Shannon Gunderson, I guess, president now, but if anybody
Oh, I know
knows
her.
anybody, it would be nice
I'll
to let them know that bus stop.
If you go to the bus stop, there is a social media, I mean, Becky left, but there is the link to the Facebook group that's promulgating this, and I am so not into social media, but if someone could just like
Which group is
deal
it?
with it.
Wait, which Facebook group is?
It's like, it says 61st Bus Stop 522 in the name. It's some long name.
I mean, I saw it circulate on Nextdoor, and I, quelled it down a little bit, but
It's there. If you
Yeah.
just physically go, it's all over the bus stop.
It's out there. Can't get to it. Okay.
We're not getting rid of it. It's not going away.
It's not going away, despite what they say. As you heard
focuses on
last week,
view.
Ballard Lots is
Fast
moving along, they
transportation.
got the 13 million, they're spending it, they're getting the work out to bid, and next year's budget is only 1.5 to keep up with the current schedule of getting the lots rebuilt in the next few years. The ask is smaller this year. I had the opportunity to meet with Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez from Seattle, along with Amy Wallen, Mayor of Kirkland, and Nancy Backus, the mayor of Auburn, in talking about housing, affordable housing and homeless housing, and what we're all doing in Seattle. Well, Lorena Gonzalez wants to work with us. I'm not sure what's brought on this change, but you're welcome. It's nice to work with Seattle instead of continually having issues. So, anyway, that's all I have. No further business. We are done.
35. I would have had to, I'm OCD, so I would have had to go 5 more years to hit 40.